Chapter 280. Sherwin said unhappily, "Are you saying that you don't believe in our standards?" The corners of Li Anping's lips curled up slightly. "No, it's just that I didn't expect that you guys would be able to achieve a breakthrough so quickly." Li Anping was not wrong. Usually, a breakthrough in biological research of this level would probably take 10 years as a unit. Sherwin chuckled a few times and suddenly said with some embarrassment, "Actually, this breakthrough is also related to you. Do you still remember that piece of rock that looks like a piece of meat that you brought? This breakthrough in human cloning technology is all thanks to it." Oh, Li Anping had not expected that this piece of flesh would be of use to the breakthrough in human cloning. Back then, he had only instinctively felt that it was a good thing. Suddenly, he reacted. "You guys couldn't have used up that thing, right?" "Of course not," Sherwin said. Sherwin said, "We made a breakthrough in the cloning technology based on the research of that stone. As for that piece of rock itself, it is indeed some kind of living creature that is in a state that is neither alive nor dead. We need more time to study it. However, it is very dangerous. Over the past year, 13 researchers have sacrificed their lives in experiments on it. Right now, we're storing it in an environment that is negative 180 degrees Celsius." Li Anping waved his hand. "All right then, bring me to see the results first." In comparison, he was more concerned about the results of the human cloning. If it was really very effective, then he would have another way to increase his strength. Although he had relied on the Hell's MAPS modifications, and his body was absorbing all sorts of energy from the air and food at all times, in addition to his daily cultivation, he was constantly becoming stronger. However, this was a very slow process. He would only be able to increase his strength by about 1.5 points in about a year. If the average level of the clones could reach level 3, no, as long as they could reach level 2, in addition to the large number of clones, it would be of great help to him. Li Anping's group of 3 walked into a large hall. 10 huge metal cabinets that looked like white coffins were lined up in a row. The surroundings were densely packed with wires and pipes that led to these 10 cabinets. The professor introduced as they walked. They came to the first metal cabinet and said, "This is the Thunder Emperor Type 3. He was originally a normal level 0 ability user, but after only 2 months, his current power output has already tripled. I estimate that by the end of next month, he will be able to reach the standard of the first level." Li Anping did not say anything. He looked at the naked man curled up inside the metal cabinet and asked, "How much is the cost?" Sherwin replied, "Not counting the initial research funds, just cultivating such a sample would cost about 5 million. However, we are currently improving the relevant technology. If we want to mass produce in the future, the time and price will be greatly reduced. I am confident that I can control the cost to be between 2 to 3 times that of ordinary clones." As Li Anping listened to Sherwin's answer, he carefully looked at the entire metal cabinet and the Lei Form 3 inside. He saw countless electric currents, nutrients, nutrient fluids, and various substances that Li Anping did not know were injected into Lady's body. He could feel the power in the other's body slowly increasing. Although this increase was minuscule and far from the growth of ordinary people, he did it 24 hours a day. This alone was terrifying. Li Anping asked, "This method can only be used by clones?" Sherwin nodded. "This involves genetic changes. We have to make adjustments to the embryo before birth. After these clones are born, their metabolism is much faster than ordinary people. Their lifespan is only about 3 years. Ordinary people can't use this method." The professor beside him said, "Lei Form 3's combat ability is not strong, but it is a very good generator. If it is mass-produced and used to generate electricity, its cost-effectiveness is even higher than nuclear power plants." Sherwin hesitated. "That's not very good. Moreover, if we use clones to generate electricity, it will be very troublesome if we are discovered." "What's so troublesome about it? It's just a bunch of unknown protein." The professor ignored Sherwin's hesitation. "Sir, if you can approve the mass production of Lei Form 3, I can guarantee that within 50 years, the whole of Xia will not have to worry about electricity. This will be the most outstanding bioelectricity technology of this century. Liamping shook his head. He naturally could not agree to the professor's suggestion. Not to mention the Ley D Form 3's effects. Just the risk of information being leaked after it was used on a large scale would be troublesome enough. Most people in modern society would not be able to be like the professor and treat the clones in front of them purely as experimental materials. Sherwin hurriedly introduced the next material to prevent the professor from suggesting it again. He pointed at the man in the second metal cabinet and said, "This is compound form 2. The original material is Zhou Kang's 4 complex abilities. This clone has perfectly inherited the 4 abilities." Sherwin interrupted from his side. "Compound form 2 is more suitable for battle than Thunder Emperor form 3. I tried to add a smart chip into its brain, and it can basically complete most of the simple tasks. Furthermore, it has no self-awareness, no fear or hesitation. It is an excellent source of biochemical soldiers. I have already sent people to research a new generation of smart chips and add combat abilities. Once successful, you will be the best humanoid weapon." Liamping nodded and did not say anything. Now is not the time to use clones on a large scale. However, they could try to produce some as a supplement to the regular army or as a secret weapon. There were a few more materials left. Liamping asked again, "Is there a limit to this growth? What's the highest level it can reach?" Sherwin thought for a moment and said, "According to our calculations, reaching the second energy level is no problem." The professor on the side added, "But as you know, from the third energy level onwards, it is not just a simple increase in strength. It is also related to the user of the ability, and there are some strange abilities that we don't know how to improve the level of the clones." Liamping showed a satisfied look. Being able to reach the second energy level was enough to meet his requirements. He immediately ordered Sherwin and the professor to speed up the production of clones. As for the previous low-level clones, they could temporarily stop production. At this point, Liamping asked, "Osborne, is he still in the Institute?" Osborne was Peter Parker's uncle. He was captured by Scorpion along with many famous scientists. Sherwin said, "Yes, he has recently been researching a function enhancer. I heard that he has achieved some success. It can double the strength and speed of ordinary people, but there are some side effects that are still being modified." Liamping nodded and let them leave. Then he summoned Scorpion. In recent months, it was Scorpion and others who were responsible for the defense work of the 8th Research Institute. After Scorpion came up, he stood below with a respectful face, staring at his toes, waiting for Liamping's question. Ever since he had returned from his fieldwork in the south, he had been working in the vicinity of Tianjin. In the past few months, even his skills had regressed, and he had gradually reduced his interactions with the other combat members. Clearly, he had decided to stop fighting and killing, and to develop his career as a civilian. Liamping asked, "How are you doing? How have you been recently?" "Thanks to my lord, the current situation is of course much better than in the past." Liamping hummed and asked, "I heard you got married?" "Half a year ago." When he said this, Scorpion, who had always been a fierce image in Liamping's mind, showed a gentle smile. There's a kind of breath called happiness in his eyes. "It's too small to bother my lord." Seeing this, Liamping understood that the man in front of him was no longer suitable for frontline work. This was because he already had concerns in his heart. Liamping sighed. Suddenly, he said somewhat dispiritedly, "Give me a report on the recent situation in the Institute. Then, go to Lu Sheng tomorrow and hand over the job to him. You don't have to do the defense work of the 8th Research Institute in the future. You can pick a civilian job yourself." Scorpion was overjoyed. He looked at Liamping and said happily, "Thank you, my lord." He had long been inclined to transfer to civilian work. For this reason, he had done a lot of preparation in the past 6 months, reading a lot of books and taking a lot of exams. But Liamping's words were obviously more useful than these things. Then in Scorpion's cheerful tone, Liamping began to listen to the other party's report slowly. Liamping listened, and Scorpion spoke without any delay. 2 hours later, the latter reported to Liamping about the past 6 months, especially the few points that Liamping was particularly concerned about. He focused on them, but Liamping stopped and found no problems. Even the researchers who were forcibly kidnapped like Osborne were cut off from the outside world and had been monitored. But Li Onping still asked Scorpion to make arrangements to strengthen the defense of the 8th Research Institute and deepen the monitoring of researchers such as Osborne. Chapter 281. When the Xia Dragonfinch became busier because of Li Onping's arrival. On a certain island in the West Sea, there was beautiful sunshine and beaches everywhere. A man was lying on the beach, sunbathing happily. The man had a buzz cut, and his naked upper body was full of well-defined muscles. While he was sunbathing, a beautiful woman with wheat-colored skin was applying sunscreen on his body. The man was enjoying the woman's massage while revealing a smile of enjoyment. His hands rubbed against the woman's body from time to time, causing the woman to dodge. While the man was enjoying himself, a man who looked like a butler came to his side. Even though the sun was shining brightly, he still wore a well-ironed suit. The glaring sun shone on his face, but he didn't show any expression of discomfort. There wasn't a trace of sweat on his body, as if the scorching sun didn't exist. "Young master, today's newspaper." The butler handed a newspaper to the man. The man laid down and enjoyed the beauty's massage while opening the newspaper. However, the hijacking on the front page didn't seem to arouse his interest. The rest of the finance, military, and politics were nothing in his eyes. He only stopped when he flipped to a news article that was more like gossip. He revealed an amused smile. The title of the news article was Secret Trip, Sage Princess Becoming the Xia's Imperial Concubine. The accompanying picture was of Claudia getting off the plane. The man laughed, and his eyes were full of lust. He licked his lips and said, "Not bad, not bad. This is Li Onping's girl? I want this girl." As he said that, he touched the woman's chest and said with a smile, "When the time comes, you will be sisters. Together with Dong Sa and the rest, you can serve me well together." Although the woman's face was full of resentment, she didn't resist fiercely. She only silently endured the man's harassment. The butler was expressionless, as if he was used to it. When the man saw that the woman didn't dare to resist, his hands became even more unrestrained. He began to pull the woman's clothes, as if he was going to start a big battle on the beach. The woman closed her eyes as if she had accepted her fate. Tears trickled down from her eyes. The man smiled and wiped away the tears on the woman's cheeks. He said, "Don't cry, don't cry. I'll let you know the benefits of being a woman in a while. Besides, I'm the one chosen by the heavens. Being my woman is much better than being a princess on this island." Just as the man was slowly unbuttoning the woman's clothes, a cough suddenly sounded behind them, startling the woman. She immediately gathered her clothes and retreated to the side. The man didn't stop him. Instead, he looked behind him in annoyance. He saw a ghost-like figure floating on the beach. From the appearance, it actually looked like Tian Haowen. However, at this moment, he was slowly floating in the air. His body was in a semi-transparent state. One could directly see through his body to see the sea behind him. The man looked at Tian Haowen and didn't show any surprise. He only said impatiently, "What are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to talk to the Xia Dragonfinch's people first and wait for my news?" Tian Haowen secretly sized up the disheveled woman and said, "I can't drag it out for much longer. Aren't you ready on your side? I'm afraid that if I drag it out for too long, they will do something to Pete." Unexpectedly, the man opposite him revealed a tyrannical expression and directly stretched out his palm. Tian Haowen only felt that his body was out of control, and the consciousness in his mind was shattered in an instant. Even his body, which was now floating in midair, showed signs of collapsing. He couldn't see, hear, or think. His mind was blank. By the time Tian Haowen reacted, his neck had already been tightly gripped by the man's right hand. The man's beast-like eyes were only a few inches away from him. Tian Haowen could see the endless madness and greed in them. He heard the man say word by word into his ear, "Don't doubt my decision." Also, the man's right hand suddenly clenched so tightly that it seemed like he was going to break Tian Haowen's neck. The immense strength brought Tian Haowen endless pain. "Don't you dare lay your hands on my woman. Now, Scram back and wait for my news." After saying that, the man exerted force with his right hand and broke Tion Howin's neck. Tion Howin's body dissipated into countless light spots and slowly dissipated into the air like a television signal that was not connected to a good signal. Seeing that Tion Howin had disappeared, the man clapped his hands in annoyance and cursed. "Damn it! How dare you call yourself an Avenger? You were dealt with so quickly by Desya Dragonfinch. What a bunch of useless trash." In another corner of the eastern continent, in a dilapidated underground hotel, Tion Howin, who was lying on the bed, suddenly sat up. His head was covered in cold sweat, and his eyes were filled with panic. It was only after panting for a minute that he slowly calmed down. I'm fine. My body is fine." Thinking of this, Tion Howin looked at his skinny lower body. His eyes were filled with joy and hatred. The paralysis of his lower body could be said to be the greatest hatred in his life. However, if it were not for the paralysis of his lower body, he would not have awakened his ability. This made him feel both sad and happy. It also made him hate Desya Dragonfinch and Li Onping even more. As for his ability, it was called astral projection. This ability allowed him to pull his consciousness out of his body and form a clone outside his body. It had all sorts of incredible powers. The most important thing was that no matter how many times his astral projection was killed, his body would not suffer any damage other than mental exhaustion. Thinking of the man who attacked him, Tion Howin gritted his teeth and revealed a ruthless look in his eyes. He took out a notebook and pen from under his pillow and began to record the feelings of this attack. The man who defeated him in one blow today called himself the God King. Since last year, he had been looking for the Avenger and providing financial and technical assistance behind the scenes in order to help them fight against Desya Dragonfinch. This was normal in today's situation where Desya was the king of the world. People's desires were endless. After all, not everyone was willing to give up their country to someone else, even if the other party was Li Onping. The God King's country was a small island called Dallas in the West Sea. Its area was only the size of a small to medium-sized city. Its population was less than 2 million. At first, the Avenger was worried that this was a trap set by Desya Dragonfinch. They even carefully investigated the man's identity. His real name was Debuda. He was the son of a fisherman in Dallas. Before the age of 14, he was no different from an ordinary Dallasite. He would muddle along day by day. Perhaps he would muddle along for the rest of his life. However, in the summer when he was 14, everything changed. That day, Debuda was swept away by the waves when he was playing by the sea. When everyone thought that he was dead, he returned 3 days later and showed an unparalleled talent in the days that followed. Debuda, who was originally at the bottom of his class, only took a few weeks to become the first in his grade. Not only did he excel in his studies, but he also showed outstanding talent in the field of art. When he was 15, he wrote 10 songs and sent them to a record company. When he was 16, he published his first web novel online and earned millions in royalties. Then, he used the accumulated funds to open a shipyard in his hometown and rented the boats to fishermen. It was said that the fishing boats in the shipyard were designed by Debuda. One of the main sources of income in Dallas came from the fishing industry. The abundant fish resources brought Debuda a huge income for the shipyard. In addition, there were web novels, comics, music, and games. In the year that he entered high school, he had already become a multimillionaire. After that, he established a relationship with the upper echelons of the Dallas government and began to participate in the government's offshore oil, ocean transportation, national power grid, and other businesses. By 3 years ago, he had become the richest man in Dallas, the world's youngest billionaire. However, that was the end of the information about him. When the Avenger wanted to know more about him, he found that he could no longer find out about the other party's situation. After meeting him, Tion Howin realized that this man, who was called Debuda but hated his own name and called himself the Divine King, was definitely not simple. The most obvious point was that Tion Howin could not sense the psychic chi on him at all. However, the other party was always able to display all kinds of strange abilities. For example, The move that had made him lose consciousness today was already the fourth one. The Xia dragonfinch is an irreconcilable enemy, but this divine king is not a kind person either. Tian Haowen summarized the information recorded in the notebook and thought about the next countermeasures bit by bit, perfecting his plan. Chapter 282. In the secret room, a huge searchlight shone on Peter Parker's head, waking him up from his deep sleep. The first thing he saw was the piercing light. Peter Parker looked around and could only see that other than the areas illuminated by the searchlight, everything else was pitch black. He did not know how big the room was or if there was anyone around. He moved his body and realized that he was fixed to a chair. He could not break free at all. His mind, which was in a state of chaos, gradually regained its senses. He recalled that he had been captured by the great Xia dragonfinch. Another interrogation? Just as Peter Parker was thinking about this, a man's voice came from all directions. "Peter, hello." With a cold laugh, Peter replied, "Don't waste your time. My team members are all dead. What else do you want to know?" "Tian Haowen. He should be one of your members, right?" Peter shook his head. "He quit a long time ago. I don't know where he went. I think we should stop beating around the bush." The next moment, a voice rang out in Peter's ears. "Peter." The voice was cut off halfway. However, these two short words made Peter extremely agitated. He was like a trapped beast. The muscles in his four limbs swelled up abruptly, and surging psychic chi gushed out. "Uncle." He stared with bloodshot eyes and said word by word, "What did you do to him? Don't be nervous. He's doing quite well now. However, I can't guarantee what will happen next." Peter Parker clenched his teeth. The muscles in his body continued to exert force, trying to break free from the restraints on his body. However, over 20 alloy steel bars were fastened to his four limbs and torso. Even the entire chair was fixed to the ground. Even when streaks of blood appeared on his body, he did not show any signs of breaking free. "I really don't know about Tian Haowen. He quit the Avengers last year." After a moment of silence, the male voice spoke again. "Do you think there's any meaning in persisting? The Avengers have been completely wiped out. In order to protect a fugitive, you intend to sacrifice your own family? As long as you tell us Tian Haowen's abilities and whereabouts, we'll let your uncle go. I guarantee that he'll be able to live like an ordinary person and no one will disturb him." Peter Parker's brows furrowed tightly. The muscles on his body were like small snakes that were constantly twisting. Just as his heart was filled with contradictions, a miserable scream entered his ears. It sounded like Osborn's voice. In an instant, the alloy steel bars on Peter Parker's body creaked, as if they would break apart at any moment. The veins on his forehead bulged, and his bloodshot eyes stared in the direction of the searchlight. "Stop! Don't hurt him!" Seemingly happy to see Peter Parker's anxious look, the voice cheerfully laughed and said, "Don't worry, it's just a little finger. If you're willing to cooperate, we can reattach this finger now." Peter Parker gritted his teeth so hard that they made cracking sounds. His clenched fists dripped with blood, which showed how agitated and conflicted he was now. "Lianping de Xia dragonfinch, I'll never let you go." But reality would not change as he imagined. The man said impatiently, "Your uncle seems to have fainted from the pain. If you still don't make a decision, we'll have to wake him up." Peter Parker trembled all over. If the anger and hatred in his heart could be materialized, it would be enough to ignite the entire city. He closed his eyes in pain, and the scenes of the past few years reappeared in his mind. His uncle's voice and smile, the scenes of him raising him, the scenes of the Avengers members dying one by one, the Xia's dictatorship. The scenes of the past quickly alternated in Peter Parker's mind. Finally, his body suddenly relaxed. He opened his eyes, revealing a hint of understanding. "I've been fighting for so long, and it's no longer just for myself. I'm sorry, Uncle." At this moment, the man's voice sounded again. "Have you thought about it? Your uncle has lost a lot of blood." Peter Parker smiled bitterly and said slowly, "Go back and tell Lianping that his power can't scare everyone, and not everyone will succumb to fear. Let him and his utopia go to hell. We don't need him to arrange our lives for us." After saying this, Peter Parker only felt incomparably carefree. He felt that at this moment, he had become a hero who fought for freedom and democracy. However, this feeling did not last long. The next moment, the surroundings returned to darkness. Before Peter Parker could adapt, he felt as if something had pricked his neck and he fell into a coma again. Outside the secret room, Zwamai and Yinbei looked at the display screen, which showed the scene of Peter Parker being carried out. Twisting his body uneasily, Zwamai reported to Li Onping behind him, "Sir, why don't we let Osborn persuade him personally?" "It's useless." Yinbei looked coldly at Peter Parker in the camera. Just now, he made it clear that he would rather sacrifice his uncle than betray his teammates. If we let Osborn persuade him, he'll only be more uncooperative after he knows that Osborn has joined us. Zwamai thought for a moment and said, "Maybe he saw through it? Or we can let Osborn record a more tragic video for him to see." "I don't think so. His spirit is so tough that even the masters of the Wong family can't hypnotize him. Now that he's made up his mind, I'm afraid that even if Osborn dies in front of him, it won't change his mind." Zwamai curled his lips. "He's a madman, just like a fanatic." "All right." Li Onping interrupted the conversation between the two men. He ordered, "Don't worry about him. Get ready for Plan B." The two men obviously had no objection to Li Onping's decision, and they bowed and retreated at the same time. After the two men left, Li Onping took out his mobile phone and looked at it. A few minutes ago, he received another anonymous email. After Li Onping opened it, he could see 5 photos. Inside, there was a row of more than 20 clone bodies placed together. There was both the background of the 8th Research Institute and the background of other unknown areas. Li Onping had received a similar anonymous email this morning. This was why he came to watch Peter Parker's interrogation. He didn't want Momo to know about this, so Li Onping asked Lu Feng to find a group of technicians to trace the source of the email. But there was no result. The other party's technology in this regard was higher than theirs. The phone rang. It was Lu Feng's voice. "Sir, the new email has been found." "How is it?" "It's an internet cafe in Lily City. I've already sent someone there." Li Onping nodded and hung up the phone. Although he had already sent someone there, he didn't have any expectations. Outside an internet cafe in Lily City, 6 black shadows, like sharp swords, rushed over in a few seconds at a speed that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye. They were agile, and their breath was restrained, like ghosts in the night. What was more special was that they were more or less emitting psychic energy from their bodies. These 6 people were actually all ability users. No one at the front door. No one in the hall. No one at the back door. Nothing in the basement. Voices spread through the air through the radio, but the news made the captain in charge of the operation feel that something was wrong. "Little White, check." "Understood." After saying this, a female ability user opened her mouth, and an ultrasonic wave that was difficult for human ears to hear came out of her mouth. In the blink of an eye, it covered the entire building where the internet cafe was located. But the result made her very confused. "Captain, there's no one. No, there's something on the ceiling of the building." A loud boom drowned out her voice, and the entire internet cafe turned into a sea of fire. 5 minutes later, Li Onping received a call from Lu Feng. His expression turned increasingly grim, and he smiled coldly. Then he made a call and said slowly, "Officially activate Plan B." Half an hour later, on a huge passenger plane, the man who called himself the God King looked at the screen and broke into a satisfied smile. He reached out his hand to the side, and without saying anything, the butler had already served him a glass of red wine. After taking a sip, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. "It's done. Desia's network system is a pile of junk. With the Red Queen taking action personally, they won't even be able to find out anything about us." Shaking the wine glass in his hand, he couldn't help but feel proud. What Li Onping? What heavenly queen? What a bunch of country bumpkins. It won't be long before all of you kneel down and lick my feet like dogs. Chapter 283. When Peter Parker woke up again, it was still dark before his eyes. No, it was more accurate to say that his eyes had been covered. After struggling slightly, Peter Parker felt that his hands and feet seemed to be tied up, and the space he was in seemed to be constantly shaking. Am I in a car? However, before Peter Parker could think about it, a fist had already hit him in the stomach. Two men grabbed his arms, one on the left and one on the right. Be honest. Don't move. Peter Parker did not resist. In such an unknown situation, he could not choose to act rashly. Are you awake? A man's voice came from in front of Peter. We're going to let you go now, so you'd better not do anything stupid. This sentence made Peter feel anxious and uncertain. However, the shackles on his hands and feet, the guards on his left and right, and the unknown defense force made Peter not act rashly. In the next few hours, Peter felt as if he was being transported to and fro, walking, car, boat, changing the means of transportation again and again. At first, Peter wanted to determine where he was by listening and feeling, but the destination kept changing, and he soon gave up on this idea. As the itinerary kept changing, the patience of the man opposite Peter seemed to be getting worse and worse. What? Change again? Is he playing with us? The man was flustered and exasperated. After exchanging a few more words, they escorted Peter into the car and drove off in another direction. Until now, Peter had not said a word. He was still somewhat confused about the situation in front of him. He suspected that the Dragonfinch was acting in front of him, and he also suspected that Tion Howin had really come to save him. After another half an hour, Peter got out of the car, and this time, he was escorted onto the plane. When the plane took off and he felt gravity pulling his body down, Peter Parker realized that he was on a plane. He asked tentatively, "Are we going abroad?" The guard beside him elbowed his soft abdomen. Peter coughed a few times and laughed in a low voice. "Did you not eat?" The guard was angry and was about to hit him again, but he was stopped by the person beside him. "Sorry, we have been forbidden to talk to you. Don't waste your time." Peter then said a few more words, but no one answered him. He decided to close his eyes and rest for a while to recover his energy and stamina. During this period of time, other than sleeping, he was captured and interrogated. Both his mental and physical state were at their lowest. No matter what was going to happen later, a good rest would be helpful. After an unknown amount of time, Peter felt himself being shaken awake. A group of people seemed to be tying something to his body. Then his eyes lit up. The black cloth covering his eyes had been taken off. The dazzling light made it difficult for him to see his surroundings clearly. A few seconds later, Peter, who had gradually adapted to the light, began to look around. When he saw the situation around him, his heart sank. There were a total of 5 dragon sparrow guards and 15 soldiers, all of whom were fully armed, looking at him. 2 of the soldiers were helping him put on something behind him. A man wearing the Dragonfinch's uniform looked at his watch and urged, "Are you done yet? How much longer do you need?" The 2 soldiers patted Peter Parker's back and saluted the man. "Yes, sir." Peter Parker looked at the man coldly. "Left vein, what are you going to do to me?" It turned out that the one who was escorting him was the Dragonfinch's level 4 ability user, Left Vein. This dragon sparrow guard who often captured militants, criminals, and traitors in the southern border. Peter Parker knew him. He had even fought with many parties. Left Vein didn't answer Peter Parker's question. Instead, he smiled and gave the other party a mysterious smile. "Time's up. Let him go." The interior of the plane Peter Parker was in wasn't big. It was clearly made of metal, and it was obvious that it was some kind of military transport plane. When Left Vein finished speaking, the 2 soldiers had already escorted him to the cabin door of the plane. Then, they opened the cabin door and saw a boundless desert appear in front of him. Strong winds poured in, blowing Peter Parker's hair into a mess. However, he didn't have time to care about this. He felt that something was wrong. "What are you guys trying to do?" No one answered him. A tremendous force came from behind him, and Peter Parker was kicked out of the cabin door. At this moment, Peter Parker felt as if his heart had slowed down by half a beat. The desert under his feet rapidly enlarged in his eyes, and as he fell faster and faster, gusts of wind blew against his face. He couldn't help but close his eyes. Heat waves from the ground came gushing toward him. His hands and feet were all tied up by alloy shackles, and no matter how he struggled, he was unable to break free. Just as Peter Parker thought that he was going to be smashed into a meat patty, a series of sounds rang out from behind him. A parachute opened up behind him, and the air resistance started to reduce the speed of his descent. Peter Parker recalled the actions of the two soldiers just now. So that's how it is. Are they helping me install a parachute? A dark green parachute was slowly drifting toward the ground. Under the parachute, Peter Parker was sweating profusely as he looked at the desert under his feet. He had yet to land, but he was already drenched in sweat. Just as he was thinking about what was going on, in the desert far away, a wave of sand and dust came gushing toward where he was landing. It was as if something was moving at high speed, bringing up countless sand and forming a moving wave of sand and dust. 5 minutes later, when Peter Parker landed on a sand dune, the wave of sand and dust had already arrived before him. A gust of hot wind and sand blew past his face. When the sand and dust dissipated under Peter Parker's vigilant gaze, a middle-aged man wearing a tuxedo slowly walked toward him. Desert tuxedo. No matter how he looked at it, it felt strange. What was even stranger was that the man had clearly been sprinting all the way here, bringing up sand and dust with him. However, in Peter Parker's eyes, the man was wearing a tuxedo and performing such intense exercise, yet he didn't even sweat at all. As if he didn't see Peter Parker's wary eyes, the butler-like figure walked in front of Peter Parker and said politely, "Hello, sir. You can call me Nord. I will take you away from here. Please don't resist." The man who called himself Nord spoke in a very cold tone, especially his intonation. From beginning to end, it was like a straight line, without any ups and downs. While saying these words, Nord didn't stop. He pressed his hands on the alloy shackles, and under Peter Parker's surprised gaze, with a slight struggle, the shackles were torn apart, followed by the shackles on his feet. Peter Parker rubbed his wrists that were finally freed and slowly stood up. He looked at Nord and said, "Who sent you?" Nord didn't say anything. He just pressed a finger on Peter Parker's forehead. It was so fast that Peter Parker didn't even have time to react. Then, a strange force swept across his entire body. Peter Parker's clothes, backpack, and left arm all exploded with a few electric lights. Seeing Peter Parker's surprised gaze, Nord coldly explained, "It's just an ordinary EMP to destroy the surveillance device on your body." Touching his left arm, Peter Parker felt a stab of pain. "They also put a tracker on my arm?" Nord nodded. "It seems so, but you don't have to worry. The medical equipment in the base will heal your arm." "Base? Is it here?" Nord shook his head. "You'll know in a while." Under Peter Parker's suspicious gaze, the two of them waited for about 10 seconds. Under the scorching sun, Peter Parker felt that his mouth was dry and his body was hot. His mind seemed to be in a muddle. How long do we have to wait here? Seeing that Nord didn't speak, Peter Parker felt a little helpless. The person in front of him was his only way out, surrounded by an endless desert. He had no supplies and was already at his wit's end. Just as Peter Parker was getting more and more anxious, he suddenly heard a shattering sound. It was the sound of space being torn apart. A vortex-like hole directly appeared in front of the two, and it was still expanding. It didn't stop until the hole expanded to the size of a person. Nord looked at the blue and white vortex in front of him in surprise and said, "Please come in, sir." Desya Dragonfinch's command room. A group of people were busily walking back and forth. On the huge screen, it showed the desert where Peter Parker was now. In the middle of the desert, a small green dot flashed. It was obviously Peter Parker's position. Around him were all blue dots representing Desya. The target has reached the estimated location. All units in position. The signal source of the tracker has disappeared. The opponent has anti-detection means. As the green dot on the screen disappeared, the people in the command room became busy. The surrounding blue dots quickly moved toward Peter Parker's previous position. The target has disappeared. No signal found. We lost him. Troops, start searching. Show the satellite footage. In the last row of the command room, Yinbei looked at the panicked crowd in front of him and said to Lianping, "Sir, is this okay?" Lianping shook his head and a mysterious smile appeared on his face. Chapter 284. Blinding white light, topsy-turvy dizziness, and a disordered sense of space. When everything returned to normal and Peter Parker opened his eyes, there was a huge square in front of him. There was no sign of the desert. Above Peter Parker's head was a golden and blue aircraft. The surface of the aircraft was inlaid with huge blue crystals that were emitting a blue halo. Coupled with the streamlined and mysterious body, the entire aircraft looked like a spaceship. With such a high-tech spaceship parked right above his head, Peter Parker was at a loss as to what to do. Subconsciously, he felt that the white vortex that had just opened seemed to be related to the spaceship above his head. At this moment, Nord also walked out of the white vortex. With his appearance, the white vortex slowly shrank and finally dissipated into the air. It made people wonder if everything before was just an illusion. "Sir, please come with me." Following Nord's call, Peter Parker reluctantly retracted his gaze and followed behind him, walking towards a small house in the distance. During this period, Peter Parker carefully observed the surrounding environment and found that the position of the sun seemed to be different from the one in the desert. It seemed that the white vortex just now was indeed some kind of teleportation technology, but he was not sure whether it was technology or ability. He was now in a huge square, and the surroundings were bare. Other than the gray cement floor, there was nothing else. Only the small spaceship that had stopped above his head was now flying in the opposite direction. Blue flames spewed out from the tail of the spaceship, and in the blink of an eye, the spaceship had become a small black in Peter Parker's eyes. At this moment, Nord also stopped. In front of them was a small house the size of a phone booth. When Nord stopped in front of the door of the house, a blue light swept across Nord's head horizontally. The next moment, the door of the house automatically opened inwards, and an underground passage appeared in front of Peter Parker's eyes. Nord walked in without hesitation. Peter Parker, on the other hand, hesitated for a moment. Looking at the desolate scene in the square, he finally entered the underground passage. Nord walked in front of him, and Peter Parker followed him all the way. Along the way, he felt that the underground was like an ant's nest that extended in all directions. Sometimes left, sometimes right, sometimes up, sometimes down. At first, he still had the heart to remember the route he had taken. But as more and more forks appeared, the structure of the passageway became more and more complicated. Soon, Peter Parker gave up. Was it built in such a complicated way to deal with the invasion? Nord, on the other hand, didn't hesitate at all as he walked. It was as if he had memorized the entire route. Every step he took was crisp and nimble, as if he didn't even need to think. Speaking of footsteps, Peter Parker discovered something strange. Up until now, the rhythm of the other party's footsteps had not changed at all. Even the distance between each step remained the same. This person's self-discipline is probably already at an inhuman level. Along the way, besides Nord, Peter Parker also saw some other people. Although they were all wearing different clothes, they all had the same characteristic, which was that they were all expressionless. Even if they saw Nord, they didn't greet him. They all came and went in a hurry, quickly disappearing from Peter Parker's sight. They gave Peter Parker the feeling that they were all a little similar to Nord. However, no matter how long a road was, there would always be an end. When Peter Parker followed Nord and took another 2 turns, a huge door appeared before his eyes. 2 men wearing suits with cold expressions stood outside the door. Nord led Peter Parker forward. Just as Peter Parker thought that they would say a few words, Nord merely exchanged a glance with the other party, pushed open the door, and walked in. When Peter Parker followed them in, he realized that the 2 of them were expressionless and didn't even look at him. Compared to the layout of the buildings here, these 2 guards seem to be too lax. Or could it be that Nord's status here is enough for him to casually bring people in? As Peter Parker thought about this, he had already stepped through the door. Countless display screens and electronic devices appeared before him. Below the display screens stood a blonde foreign lady with a voluptuous figure. The lady threw a glance at Peter Parker, but didn't say anything. She only instructed, do a blood test to confirm his identity. Red Queen, contact young master. A little girl's voice rang out from the display screens, connecting in progress. The network is abnormal. Please wait for a moment. The lady frowned, but didn't say anything. Nord took out a pistol-shaped syringe and said to Peter Parker, "Sir, we need to do a blood test to confirm your identity. Please don't resist." With that, he aimed the syringe at Peter Parker's neck. The latter only felt a slight piercing pain before Nord left with the syringe. Only Peter Parker and the blonde lady were left in the room. After a moment of silence, the blonde lady continued to look at the screen. Peter Parker also looked at it. He realized that there were all sorts of proper terms and numbers, but he didn't know what they meant. He gave it some thought and tried asking, "Hello, may I know which side you guys are from? Why did you save me?" The lady glanced at him and didn't continue to be silent. She just kept her back to Peter Parker and said casually, "Peter, you're a talent, but the Avengers you formed is too naive. Your current strength is too weak. That's why young Master sponsored you, hoping that you could give to Xia some trouble. Now, it seems that this is a failed investment." Peter Parker looked at the blonde lady in confusion and asked, "Are you the ones who sponsored us? Which side are you from?" The blonde lady sneered. "Didn't Tion Howin tell you about young Master? Forget it. Anyway, all you need to know now is that young Master intends to take you in as his subordinate for the sake of your potential. You can work under young Master with peace of mind in the future. Don't ever have any improper thoughts." The lady's expression was arrogant, and the words she spoke were even more arrogant. She looked as if she had done Peter Parker a great favor, which really made people feel very uncomfortable. Peter Parker suppressed the unhappiness in his heart and asked again, "I don't know what kind of person this young Master you're talking about is. How do I know if you guys are the Xia Dragonfinch in disguise, trying to get information out of my mouth?" Hearing Peter Parker say these words, the lady's expression of disdain became even stronger, as if she was mocking Peter Parker's ignorance. She snorted a few times and then said with a face full of arrogance, "Do we need to pretend to be the Xia Dragonfinch? Humph, I'm too lazy to explain it to you. In short, you'll understand once you work under young Master for a period of time. Young Master is a person blessed by the heavens. His talent is not something a third-rate guy like you can imagine. Let alone you, even if it's the Xia Dragonfinch's Li Onping or the League of Stars Heavenly Queen, or those level 5 ability users in the Western continent. Young Master will surpass them one by one. As long as you work hard, you'll naturally have a meteoric rise in the future." Just as the lady was saying these words, the big screen suddenly flashed, and a young man with a buzz cut appeared in front of the two of them. He saw the blonde lady in front of him and immediately smiled. "Kristen, how is it? Did Xia keep his promise? Did you get Peter Parker?" Seeing the King of Gods appear on the screen, the blonde lady's eyes immediately lit up. She looked at the screen with a face full of smiles and said, "Sir, we've already gotten Peter Parker. How are things on your side? Did Tyrell's matter go smoothly?" As she spoke, she stuck out her chest and twisted her waist, as if she wanted to show off her good figure. Unexpectedly, the King of Gods' eyes showed a trace of doubt. "Got him." He lowered his head and looked as if he was looking for something, then asked, "No, the mission hasn't been completed. Where's he?" The blonde lady's eyes were stunned, and she turned to look at Peter Parker. "He's here, the person behind me." At this moment, the door suddenly opened, and Nord rushed in with more than 10 strong men in black, surrounding Peter Parker. Nord himself stood in front of Kristen, blocking her. Kristen asked, "What's going on?" Nord looked at Peter Parker coldly and said, "Miss Kristen, according to the DNA comparison, the person in front of you isn't Peter Parker. He's a fake." Chapter 285. Kristen glared at Peter Parker coldly. "You're not Peter Parker, are you? Who on earth are you?" Seeing that he had been exposed, Lu Feng laughed out loud. His expression changed, and he returned to his original appearance. He had not expected that the other party would be able to verify his identity so quickly, and that the DNA test would be so fast as well. However, after he returned to his original appearance, he was not nervous at all. His gaze went past Christine and looked at the God King on the screen. "Friend, are you the leader here? May I know which power is behind you? Why do you have to go against our great Xia Dragonfinch?" Backing? The God King chuckled. Who will be able to back me up? He sized up Lu Feng and said slowly, You're Lu Feng, right? You're the person in charge of the Xia Dragonfinch's intelligence department. You're quite capable. However, your battle prowess is too weak. After being exposed, you'll be meat on the chopping board. I'll give you two options. The first is to be my subordinate and go undercover for the Xia Dragonfinch to save Peter Parker. The second is to wait for me to dissect you and turn you into an experiment subject. After saying that, the God King smiled and looked at Lu Feng. He seemed to be very confident and was not worried at all that Lu Feng might have some trump cards up his sleeve. Is there no one behind this? I wonder if it's real or not. After giving it some thought, Lu Feng probed once again. The Xia Dragonfinch's current leader is Li Onping. I don't wish to make an enemy out of him. Moreover, I don't think there's anyone in this world who could be a match for him. Hearing Lu Feng's reply, the God King was the first to laugh out loud. Christine, who was next to him, also laughed out loud. It was as if what Lu Feng had said earlier was very funny. It was only when Lu Feng frowned that the God King stopped laughing. He pointed at Lu Feng on the screen and said in disdain, You're a frog at the bottom of a well. Without waiting for Lu Feng to retort, the Divine King continued, The only reason you can view Li Onping as invincible is because you have seen too little. If he could destroy a star with a single punch and traverse the universe with his physical body, then it would be worth watching. As for now, the God King shook his head. If you're only worried about Li Onping, then there is no need for that. Furthermore, he can't even protect himself now. The three great powers of the Western continent have already devised many plans to deal with him. He might not even live for another 3 to 4 years. Lu Feng shook his head and said, Empty words have no proof. Who doesn't know how to talk? It's impossible for you to convince me with just a few words. It's best to show some evidence. The Divine King looked at Lu Feng with a mocking expression. Convince you? Was it necessary? I'll give you one last chance. Join me or die. Along with the Divine King's words, the guards, with Nord in the lead, raised their right arms simultaneously and pointed toward Lu Feng's location. Their arms went through a series of transformations, revealing hints of metallic luster. All of them turned into miniature metal cannon barrels with blue light emitted from them. It was as long as Lu Feng said no, they would fire together and kill Lu Feng on the spot. Seeing this change, Lu Feng's pupils contracted. The techniques displayed by the other party had once again surpassed his imagination. Mechanical arms? Particle cannons? Or lasers? Or are they just ordinary cannons? Lu Feng's countenance turned grim. It was as if he was facing an unknown ability user. The weapons displayed by the other party were something he had never seen before. Seeing Lu Feng's hesitant expression, Christine tried to persuade him once again. All right, Lu Feng, Li Onping, and Xia are just country bumpkins. If you follow them, you'll only be able to hang around on this road at most. It's rare that the young master wants to take you in. This is a rare opportunity. The young master can bestow upon you power and lifespan. What are you still hesitating for? It's better than dying now, right? Their persuasion is too casual. They're just trying to persuade me casually. It seems that they don't care as long as it works. Lu Feng did not say anything. His countenance was grim, and many thoughts flashed past his mind. Should I feign civility first? Or should I say that this is the end? Just as Lu Feng was hesitating, the Divine King shook his head. Stubborn. Kill him. Seeing over 10 cannons emitting blue light, Lu Feng quickly shouted, Wait a minute! The Divine King's lips twitched. Why? Have you thought things through? However, I feel that a dead person is more obedient. After killing you and modifying you into a cyborg, it'll be much easier to use you. The Divine King did not give Lu Feng any chance to explain himself. At the next moment, blue light balls lit up at the cannon's muzzles, aiming at Lu Feng's 4 limbs. It seemed that the Divine King wanted to cripple Lu Feng's mobility and then capture him alive. According to the Divine King, they were going to modify him into a cyborg. However, at this critical moment, a black figure darted out from Lu Feng's chest. At the next second, all the men, including Nord, were sent flying. Terrifying loud sounds rang out from their chests simultaneously. Blue light bullets shot out randomly from the cannons on their right hands, causing the entire room to be filled with electricity and sparks. In that instant, Nord and the others were sent flying. While they were in midair, their chests had exploded. Their metal skeletons and electric sparks splattered out. These men's chests did not have any flesh or blood and were completely made up of metal. They were all robots. However, even though they were robots, the terrifying force transmitted from their chests to the ends of their limbs. It was as if they had been run over by a train. All of the robots exploded into various metal fragments and scattered all over the ground. There was not a single intact part of them left on the ground. Under Christine's astonished gaze, she only felt a blur before her eyes, and Nord and the others had already turned into pieces on the ground. The strong wind swept through the entire room, and the terrifying sound of the explosion kept reverberating in her mind, causing her to lose her footing. At the same time, a man emitting a black aura stood before Lu Feng. Lu Feng, who had not submitted to the Divine King all this while, was now standing behind Lu Feng with his head lowered and a respectful expression. Christine looked at the other party in bewilderment and asked, "Who are you?" She was clearly an ability user, which was why she was able to see the psychic clone. The psychic clone's voice reverberated through the air. "I'm the country bumpkin you're talking about." At the next moment, the black figure swept past, and the various laser emitters, automatic machine guns, and flamethrowers that had just been lit up in a room were all smashed into pieces by Li Yanping. "Stop it!" Christine screamed. "If you kill me, young master won't let you off." The psychic clone's movements were too fast, and Christine could not see it at all. Seeing the sparks and explosions around her, she thought that the other party was going to kill her. At the same time, the door to the room opened automatically, and up to 100 robots charged in from outside. This was only the part that could be seen due to the limited angle of the room. The part that Li Yanping could not see was endless. Tens of thousands of robots rushed over from all directions of the underground base like ants. Their target was Li Yanping, the intruder. Faced with the army of robots that surged over like a tidal wave, Li Yanping appeared before Lu Feng in a flash. He took a horse stance, lowered his shoulders, and dropped his elbows. A standard right punch was thrown toward the passageway in front of him. How strong was the psychic clone at this moment? Li Yanping's physical attributes were 37. 8 in strength, 38. 2 in agility, and 38. 7 in stamina. What about the psychic clone? His strength was 39. 8, his stamina was 39. 9, and as for his agility, it had broken through to an unprecedented 40. 1. Although there was only a single-digit difference in the numbers now, when it came to Li Yanping's current stats, every 0. 1 was a huge difference. With a punch, the so-called aerodynamics had become a joke. This was because at this moment, in the face of this punch, all the vibrating air particles had become still and motionless. Countless particles were hit by this terrifying force and could not dodge in time to create a passageway. They mixed together with the fist and exploded forward. The particles in the air that were hit by this punch exploded one after another, turning into rays of light. With Li Yanping's fist as the center, the storm of particles expanded out in all directions like a bubble. The particles that scattered out at high speed collided with the surrounding air molecules, tearing them apart and stripping off the electrons. This was no longer an explosion, nor was it the transmission of power in the air. This was a punch that had completely surpassed the power of an empty palm. It had created an effect similar to a plasma cloud with pure strength. Li Yanping named this punch the molecular explosive fist. The collision between the molecules released terrifying energy. The scorching high temperature and the various rays and particles that filled the air tore everything before them apart. The metal walls were turned into countless iron, carbon, titanium, and other elements within the first microsecond. The several hundred robots were blasted into smithereens within the second microsecond. If one were to look down from high altitude, they would be able to see a huge ball of light gradually emerging from the ground. The light that was as bright as sunlight shot out from the ground, as if a sun was about to rise from the ground. A few seconds later, the light gradually dissipated. The shock wave flattened everything on the ground, sweeping through the area within a 2-kilometer radius. After the sun completely disappeared from the ground, only a huge hole that was several hundred meters deep and several hundred meters wide was left behind. On the fighter jet, Li Onping, who was sitting at the back, was reading a newspaper in his hand. When the Chi clone punched out, he suddenly lifted his head and could not help but frown. Damn it! He had not expected that the Chi clone would be strengthened so much. Li Onping, who was used to the strength of his own body, realized that something was wrong after he punched out. He had used too much strength. Not only had he destroyed the opponent's base, but he had also destroyed many clues and information, especially the advanced technology that the opponent had displayed. This was something that Li Onping had been determined to get his hands on. Now, he could only wait and see how much of it was left. However, it was fortunate that the Divine King did not seem to be in the base. There would still be opportunities to capture him in the future. But next time, I'll have to be gentler when I punch. No, for the sake of safety, I'd better not punch out. Chapter 286. Plumes of thick smoke billowed out of the huge hole. The God King's base was directly destroyed by the Psychic Incarnation's punch. Only a huge cave and a large number of broken weapons, robots, and other wreckage were left. At the edge of the pit, a red and yellow metal arm stretched out, followed by another arm. A man wrapped in steel armor climbed to the edge. The entire armor was red and yellow, and at the chest of the armor, there was a bright blue light spot. Lying on the ground, the man in the armor was gasping for breath. Energy is about to be exhausted. The power source is 92% damaged. The armor is 78% damaged. A series of bad news appeared from the helmet, and the figure opened the helmet, revealing a charming and gorgeous face. It was Christine, who had just threatened Lu Feng. At this moment, her whole body was wrapped in the Iron Man armor, but her delicate face was pale, and her golden hair was stuck together, but she was not in the mood to care so much. She climbed to the edge of the big pit and looked at the scene in front of her with a look of disbelief. After 2 full years of operation, trillions of dollars have been invested in countless efforts of the young master. At this moment, the base had been completely turned into ruins. How could Christine accept this? But just as Christine's face was pale and she was about to collapse, the Psychic Incarnation had already grabbed Lu Feng and appeared behind him. Kristen also remembered that she was still far from being out of danger. Turning her head, the monster that was emitting black gas and destroyed the entire base with one punch was standing with Lu Feng, looking at her maliciously. What are you doing?" Christine stood up in panic, and she started the Iron Man armor on her body. But except for a few sparks on her back, she could not fly. Damn it, the explosion just now? The Iron Man armor is too damaged. Li Onping didn't care about Christine's question, and his eyes looked at the Iron Man armor worn by the other party. The technical content of this thing was very high. At least all the technology of the Xia Dragonfinch was high. Similar things, Li Onping had seen Violet's modified human in Jadeite City, and the Warrior of Destruction he had killed later. Li Onping was still very interested in these high-tech products. It's just that Xia's research in this area is still very basic, and there are no results. But this time it seems that he can get something from the hands of this so-called God King. Seeing Li Onping not speaking, Christine swallowed and asked, "What else do you want? The young master spent a lot of effort on this base, is it even? If you still want to harm me, the young master will not let you go. We have a lot of evidence of the 8th Research Institute, and you don't want the whole world to know those things, do you?" Originally, Li Onping was curious about how the other party knew about the 8th Research Institute, but now it seems that some of the other party's technology, especially in the field of robotics, is indeed far beyond the Xia Dragonfinch. So, it is expected that they can investigate these things. Hearing Christine's words, Li Onping shook his head. "I've never been threatened. I'll ask, you answer. Tell me where the God King is, and I can give you a quick death." Christine shook her head desperately. "You don't know the horror of the young master." Li Onping, Don't look at how strong you are now. This base is just a sub-base of the young master. If the young master is really angry, you and his Xia can't bear it. I'm his woman, and if he knows that you are against me, he will definitely retaliate against you. Christine obviously gave up resistance completely because she knew that she was obviously not the opponent of the monster in front of her. However, she did not surrender, but kept threatening the other party not to act recklessly. Hearing Christine's words, Li Onping just shrugged. Childish threats. After saying this, he flicked a finger at Christine. The terrible power disturbed the air in an instant. Although Li Onping deliberately controlled it, the psychic energy incarnation just flicked his finger gently, but the air was still torn in an instant, and a white sword energy fluctuation directly shot out from Li Onping's finger. A hole dozens of meters long was cut open on the ground, and Christine didn't even have time to react. The white sword energy fluctuation had passed her body and flew hundreds of meters away. Then, a rustling sound rang in Christine's ears. She turned her head blankly and saw that her right arm wrapped in the Iron Man armor had fallen to the ground. The rustling sound was the sound of blood spilling out of the wound. At this time, the pain was transmitted from the wound on the shoulder to the brain. Li Onping murmured, "The iron lump on your body can't protect you. As for your young master, I hope he sees this scene and rushes over to trouble me." The sharp pain drowned Christine's brain in an instant, and she fell to the ground and screamed crazily. He couldn't help but curse Li Onping. "You lunatic! I'm going to kill you! I'm going to kill you! Young master won't let you go. And Xia, he will turn the entire Xia into a sea of fire. You're dead. Li Onping, you're dead." Li Onping smiled disdainfully and nodded at Lu Feng, indicating that he should help Christine stop the bleeding and not let her die accidentally. He still had a lot of questions to ask the other party. In the sky, a blue and gold fighter jet cut through the sky at an astonishing speed, with a long blue tail flame behind it, flying in the direction of the Divine King's base. On the plane's seat, the Divine King was piloting the plane anxiously. "Bastard, Li Onping, if you dare to touch Christine, I'll kill your entire family." The Divine King's face was completely twisted and hideous. In his heart, it did not matter even if the entire base was destroyed. However, if his woman were to be harmed, then even the death of the other party's entire family would not be enough to compensate for it. Ever since the accident when he was 14, when had he ever suffered such a great loss? Damn it, the arbitrators in the base have yet to recover their powers. Otherwise, they would be able to tear through space and send the troops over. The Phoenix fighter jet speed is still too slow. Just then, a translucent screen appeared before the Divine King, who was in the pilot's seat. It was an image taken from the top of the base. This was a satellite shot. What's going on? The Divine King looked at the image in disbelief. The entire base had turned into a huge black crater, with thick smoke billowing out from it. In fact, the Divine King had not been able to contact the base since earlier. However, he had not expected that it would turn into such a state. Damn it, is it Li Onping? However, the entire base was built using superalloy. Even he wouldn't be able to cause such damage. Did he use some kind of weapon? Plasma cannon? Nuclear bomb? Or gravity cannon? All sorts of thoughts flashed through the Divine King's mind. He could not believe that the sub-base that he had put so much effort into had been destroyed by Li Onping in an instant. In fact, the Divine King had been observing the situation in the room through the base's surveillance camera. Through the surveillance camera, he could not see the psychic substance at all. Therefore, he could not see Li Onping's psychic clone. In his eyes, the robots had suddenly turned into fragments, and then the entire room had exploded. Following that, he had lost contact with them. However, he had clearly heard the sound produced by the psychic clone's vibrations in the air. Therefore, he knew that it could be Li Onping. Therefore, he suspected that Li Onping had used some kind of powerful weapon to cause the destruction of the entire sub-base. After all, Li Onping had never caused such destruction in public. Furthermore, the nuclear fusion he had caused in Danyang City was also widely believed to be the hydrogen bomb that Emma had brought with her. The Divine King's guess was very reasonable to him. However, the Divine King still stopped flying the Phoenix mech. After hesitating for a long time, he finally turned around and flew back. Let's go back first. If Kristen ends up in their hands, I won't be able to do anything. A hint of viciousness flashed through the Divine King's eyes. Now that I have evidence in my hands, Li Onping won't dare to act rashly. Just this alone gives me a huge advantage. After sorting out his thoughts, the Divine King relaxed. Although he was still furious, he was no longer impulsive. He flew the Phoenix mech back. He wanted to slowly deal with Li Onping. Not only did he have to save Kristen, but he also had to save Peter Parker. Chapter 287. Above the ruins of the base, military helicopters, fighter jets, and transport planes flew past from time to time. The huge hole in the base was surrounded by layers of walls, barbed wire, and isolation belts. Countless fully armed soldiers, uniformed Dragon Sparrow guards, and researchers in biochemical suits filled the entire base. Following the arrival of Li Onping's main body, countless people belonging to the Xia had already taken over the ruins of the base. All sorts of materials, and information from the computer were being dug up. In fact, the operation this time was supposed to have Lu Feng pretend to be Lu Feng, while Li Onping's Nihility clone possessed Lu Feng's body. Furthermore, Lu Feng was being monitored by Li Qian's ability. This way, as long as the mastermind took Lu Feng away, the Nihility clone could ensure that Lu Feng was safe and sound. Li Qian's ability could also help the Xia Dragonfinch find the mastermind's location. Unfortunately, Lu Feng was not brought to the enemy's main base, and the so-called King of Gods did not appear in person. Even so, the level of technology contained in this base was enough for the Xia Dragonfinch to reap great benefits. Seeing the expert operating the charred computer in front of him, the doctor's face was both happy and troubled. He was happy because the technology displayed by the enemy was at least 50 to 100 years ahead of the Xia's technology. He was troubled because more than half of the base was destroyed by Li Onping's punch. Even with the expert's ability to operate the computer, less than 1/3 of the information could be salvaged. However, unlike the doctor's concern, Lu Feng was more concerned about the enemy's information. How is it, expert? Can you find the location of their other bases? The expert shook his head and slowly withdrew the nihility on his finger from the computer. They're all machines that do research. Their internal network is already broken. In order to find more important information, I have to find the server where they built the data warehouse. Lu Feng sighed and raised his head to look at the ruins around him. As for how much information they would be able to find, it was hard to have any expectations. While the experts and doctors continued to collect information, Lu Feng walked into the interior of a transport plane. There were several computers and 2 large screens in the transport cabin. There were also many staff members working busily. This was the Xia Dragonfinch's temporary command center. Li Onping sat in front of the monitor and kept tapping and drawing. One list after another appeared, showing the Xia Dragonfinch's gains this time. Although he had lost a lot of things due to his attack, just the information and materials collected by the Xia Dragonfinch alone would be enough to raise the Xia's technological level by more than 15 years once they were fully digested. At this moment, the display flashed, indicating that there was a communication request. Sir, there's an unknown communication request. We can't find out where he's coming from. Should we accept it? Li Onping said indifferently. Take it. The screen flashed, and the God King's upper body appeared in front of Li Onping. Seeing Li Onping leisurely in front of him, the God King gritted his teeth and said, Li Onping, God King? Or should I say to Buddha? Li Onping said casually. Don't call me by that name. The God King said disdainfully. That name has nothing to do with me. He looked at Li Onping and said coldly, Li Onping, and to Xia Dragonfinch, you win this time. However, you've destroyed one of my subbases. Don't think that things will end so easily. Let me ask you, is Kristen in your hands? Li Onping nodded. That's right. I'll let you see. A few minutes later, under the escort of a few Dragon Sparrow guards, the pale Kristen was brought before Li Onping. When Kristen saw the God King on the screen, tears flowed down her cheeks. Young master. Seeing Kristen on the verge of tears, the God King was enraged. However, when he saw Kristen's empty sleeve, his face turned pale. He said word by word, "Kristen, where's your right hand? Did Li Onping do anything to you?" Without waiting for Kristen to say anything, Li Onping waved his hand and got his men to bring Kristen back. Looking at the enraged God King, Li Onping said calmly, "The Buddha, right? This subordinate of yours doesn't know the rules of being a prisoner, so I took off one of her hands." I said, "My name isn't the Buddha. I'm the God King." The God King's eyes were bloodshot, and he bellowed like an enraged, demonic beast. "Li Onping, Kristen is my woman. If you dare to touch her again, I'll make you regret living in this world." "Oh, you care about her a lot?" Li Onping smiled. "That's for the best. If you don't want anything to happen to her, then hand Tian Haowen over. As for the matter of the 8th Research Institute, it's best that you rot in your stomach for the rest of your life." The God King was so angry that his entire body trembled. Ever since he came to this world, he had never been bullied like this. It was a great humiliation. Looking at Li Onping's indifferent face, the God King directly turned off the communication. With a furious roar, the God King smashed his fist on the control panel in front of him, creating a huge crater in the control panel. Sparks flew out from the crater. "Trash! Li Onping, you trash! I'm going to kill you!" As he roared, the God King pulled out the light sword at his waist. With a few slashes, he sliced the control panel in front of him into pieces. Beside him, a young woman dressed as a maid was looking at the God King in front of her with a face full of fear. In her memory, no matter what kind of situation he encountered, the man in front of her would always have a face full of confidence, as if everything was under his control. In fact, up until now, the God King had never failed with his endless supply of advanced technology. This was the first time the young woman had seen the God King so furious. The only time it was similar was last year, when a prince from Dallas flirted with Sierra. In the end, that prince was assassinated by the God King the next day. Before he died, his lower body was chopped off, and he was subjected to all kinds of cruel torture. However, compared to this time, the God King's fury was more than 100 times stronger. Just as the young woman was thinking about this, she suddenly heard the God King say coldly, "Dong." Although the God King's eyes were still bloodshot, his fury had gradually subsided. The only thing left was a sense of desolation. "Young master." The young woman named Dong who was dressed as a maid, bowed and said, "Go and bring Tian Haowen here." After a pause, the God King continued, "Bring T-1000 with you. If he doesn't want to come, then bring him here." Dong hesitated and said, "Young master, are we going to hand him over to Li Onping?" The God King snorted coldly and said, "Just go when I tell you to. Frison is my woman. I won't let anyone hurt her." Dong nodded and wanted to say something. However, when she saw the God King's cold gaze, she bowed and left. The God King was left alone in the room. He quietly looked at the big screen. On it was the last image that Li Onping had left when he was communicating with the God King. Looking at Li Onping in the image, the God King's eyes flashed with a sinister look. Women were the God King's biggest taboo. Anyone who touched his women had to die. He couldn't even think about it. This woman included a wide range of people. Everyone who was related to the God King, the people he liked, and even the people he admired were all included in this range. Frison was one of the women that the God King especially doted on during this period of time. This was why he had let her take charge of the base. This was also one of the God King's habits. He would let the women he doted on manage a part of his base. However, not only had Li Onping captured Frison, but he had also broken one of her hands. How could the God King not be enraged and crazy? Just a mere aboriginal. The God King gritted his teeth and said, "I'll let you be arrogant for now. After I've exchanged for the space carrier, the Dead Star, and the Granzin, I'll bury the entire Desya Dragonfinch with you." Thinking about how the aboriginals, who were all waiting to be surpassed and trampled on, were now bullying him, the God King got angrier and angrier. However, What he didn't know was that even though he had decided to be merciful and let them off for now, they didn't intend to let him off so easily. Chapter 288. The Xiaolong K base inside the training room. Lian Ping's right hand was supporting a huge steel column. The steel column had a diameter of more than 50 meters, and it led directly to the ceiling. Lian Ping had used similar equipment to train his body in the past. Through the mechanical device on the ceiling, the steel column could generate hundreds of tons of force. However, with the passage of time and Lian Ping's improvement, the equipment in the past was no longer enough for Lian Ping to use. Therefore, he got someone to rebuild one into Xia Dragonfinch's base and improve its performance, allowing him to generate even more force. With the Xia's modern mechanical technology, although they had never encountered something that purely required weight and strength, it was not difficult to solve. Moreover, this was Lian Ping's request, so it was immediately given the highest priority and was quickly built. Lian Ping was supporting the steel column with one hand, and his entire body was standing under the steel column, like an ant that could be crushed to death at any time. However, Lian Ping was supporting it with one hand, and the steel column, which weighed more than 1,000 tons, did not move at all. It did not show any signs of falling. And under Lian Ping's feet, if one were to observe carefully, they would realize that the soles of his feet were always about an inch away from the ground. This was Lian Ping using the field of nothingness to move his body. Otherwise, with such a huge force pressing down on Lian Ping's body through the steel column, and then transmitted through Lian Ping's feet to the ground, the terrifying pressure would probably pierce through the ground in an instant. Feeling the weight in his hands, Lian Ping said to the microphone in the room with some dissatisfaction, "Is this already the highest force?" A voice came from the broadcast, and a man said with a trembling voice, "The gravity and the force of the machine have reached 100,000 tons. This is already the machine's limit." "Is that so?" Lian Ping revealed a hint of disappointment in his heart. The hand that was supporting the steel column suddenly exerted force, and from the palm of his hand, he used 5 fingers to support it. Then it quickly became 4 fingers, 3 fingers, until he reached 1 finger. Because of the field of nothingness, no matter how many fingers he used, the surface area of the steel column would not change. The only thing that changed was that the part of Lian Ping's body that bore the force had changed from his entire palm to his index finger. Even so, using 1 index finger to support 100,000 tons of force, Lian Ping still did not feel like he had reached his limit. Even when he changed his palm, the steel column did not move up and down at all. This meant that from the beginning to the end, Lian Ping was holding back. The weight in front of him was no different than a toy to him. Just as Lian Ping was training, the electronic door beside the room slowly opened. Yanbei walked in. Looking at the scene in front of him, he could not help but take a deep breath. He deeply knew what kind of force Li's power was. He felt that he was becoming more and more obedient to Lian Ping, but there was nothing he could do. When Yanbei first escaped, he was still arrogant, thinking that he could surpass Lian Ping one day and become a master. But now, he had buried this thought deep in his heart, somewhere that he could not find. He was not the only one who felt that it was impossible for him to defeat Lian Ping. He even suspected that there was no creature in this world that could fight against Lian Ping. Looking at Lian Ping, who was fiddling with the steel column, Yanbei bowed and reported, "Kristen has told us everything. She's only a second-rank metahuman, and her willpower is not that strong. She was easily hypnotized by our metahuman and told us everything." Hearing Yanbei's words, Lian Ping did not stop training. He bent his fingers to lift and put down the steel column. He asked casually, "Do you know where the King of Gods is?" Looking at the solid steel column that was 50 meters in diameter, it groaned under Lian Ping's manipulation. Yanbei gulped and said, "We're not sure where the King of Gods is. This woman is just a movie star, and she has the ability to charm ordinary people. She's known the King of Gods for about half a year. Other than the destroyed base, we know the location of 2 other bases. But we're not sure if those 2 bases are the King of Gods' main bases or if the King of Gods is there. Li Onping nodded and controlled the position of the steel column with the virtual field. He slowly walked out from under the steel column. 2 bases, huh? My clone, and I will be in charge of 1 each. You guys send troops to follow behind. This time, I'll try to leave a complete base for you guys. Yin Bei was worried. But the King of Gods still has evidence of the 8th Research Institute. If we act rashly, he slowly put the steel column back on the ground. A low noise came from between the steel column and the ground. But because Li Onping was holding it, the ground only shook slightly. He coldly said, "Then let's get rid of the 8th Research Institute. Follow the plan." Yin Bei's eyes widened. He was confused. Isn't it a little too early? After all, the news hasn't been leaked yet. If we move now, it'll cause a lot of negative effects in the country. Li Onping looked at Yin Bei and said, "I won't compromise with the King of Gods. I'll keep Peter Parker. I'll capture Tian Haowen. I'll take all of the King of Gods' high-tech stuff. As for the 8th Research Institute, since it's been exposed, I'll get rid of it myself and build a new one. Tell Wen and the doctor to get started." Understood. Yin Bei nodded and slowly retreated. East Continent, West Sea, near 5-Star Ocean. A fishing boat was sailing on the surface of the sea. The sun was shining brightly, and the sea breeze was blowing. At this moment, the sea revealed its gentle side. The captain of this small fishing boat, James, moved a deck chair and placed it on the deck, enjoying a rare moment of leisure. Unfortunately, the peace did not last long. Under this peaceful atmosphere, there was an intense undercurrent under the sea. The entire fishing boat started to shake violently. As the captain, James felt that something was wrong and immediately got up. "What's going on?" "There's something under the sea. It's coming up." The entire sea surface was slowly rising under a huge force. The crew quickly pulled the sails, turned the rudder, and started the motor of the fishing boat. They dodged to the side. It took a lot of effort for them to dodge this sudden wave. However, the crew was stunned. This was because at the place where they were just now, a huge object that they had never seen before was slowly rising from the sea surface. It was covered in an unknown golden metal. Its shape was shuttle-shaped, and there were countless crystal arrays embedded in its armor. A layer of blue plasma shield that was hard to see with the naked eye kept flashing around its body, pushing away the surrounding seawater. The flying boat, that was one. 5 kilometers long, rose from the bottom of the sea and slowly flew toward the sky. A huge shadow covered the surrounding sea surface. The crew on the small fishing boat looked at the shadow in the sky in a daze. The seawater that was not pushed away in time fell down from the plasma shield and returned to the surface. It looked as if it was drizzling. In the control room of the flying boat, there were countless robots with metal skeletons. The God King sat in the captain's seat. A young girl with short red hair stood behind him. She was dressed in maid attire, and she looked like a personal maid. She was the Divine King's other personal maid, Xia. "Captain, we've discovered civilians on the surface of the sea below the boat. It's the fishing boat from the ice fortress." The Divine King looked coldly at the fishing boat on the screen and said casually, "Sink them." "Yes, sir." An interceptor that was the size of a car flew out from the flying boat. When it passed by the fishing boat, 2 blue beams of light turned the fishing boat into a pile of burning steel. The flying boat then rose rapidly and flew toward the target location. Xiar asked in confusion, "Young master, why are we giving up the underwater base? We've been developing this base for more than a year. It's too much of a loss to give it up now." The Divine King looked at the aircraft carrier breaking through the sea of clouds and said with hatred, "Kristen might not betray me, but the Xia Dragonfinch has too many ability users. There's also the Wong family. Their ability is hypnosis. Kristen is only at the 2nd energy level. She might expose the location of the base. We have evidence from the 8th Research Institute. Li Onping won't dare to fall out with us directly. However, surveillance and investigation are essential. I don't want to expose all the power in my hands to Li Onping. Also, I spent so much effort to exchange for this aircraft carrier. I'm just worried that something might happen." The Divine King looked at the beautiful Xia, and a hint of desire flashed in his eyes. He grabbed Xia chin and said with a smile, "Don't worry. I've taken away all the important things in the base. With the many robots under my command, it's easy to build a base. However, this time, I plan to build the base on Tyrole's side." Thinking of this, the Divine King's eyes flashed coldly again. "Oomph. There are many people in the Western mainland who want to deal with Lianping. I just need to add fuel to the fire and slowly wait for them to fight each other. During this time, I'll focus on developing the base. When I exchange for something more powerful, I won't have to be afraid of Lianping." "Young master, you're amazing." Xia Er's face blushed as the Divine King held her chin. She said softly, "But what about Sister Kristen? Didn't Sister Dong go to catch Tian Haowen?" "Of course. We'll go to the Western mainland together after I exchange for Kristen." Looking at the seductive expression on Xia Er's face, the Divine King couldn't help but pout and slowly kiss her cheek. However, just as his lips were about to touch her cheek, the aircraft carrier suddenly received an emergency message. The Divine King hurriedly looked at the screen. It turned out that another base had been attacked while retreating. Chapter 289. In modern society, technology was advanced and there were eyes everywhere in the sky. No matter how desolate the land was, it would be exposed to the world one day. Therefore, in order to hide his development and accumulate power in the dark, the other two bases of the God King were built in secret. One of them was at the bottom of the sea, while the other was built underground. It was under a snow mountain in the ice fortress of the eastern mainland. As the psychic incarnation could be illusory and corporeal, it was not affected by air resistance, and its mass was negligible. Therefore, it could fly much faster than Lianping. When Lianping made the decision to uproot the two bases of the God King, the psychic incarnation had already arrived at the Snow Mountain base 2 hours earlier than the main body. Standing in the middle of a forest, the psychic incarnation was faced with a huge rock wall. However, he knew that it was just a disguise. When necessary, the rock wall could be opened directly, and it would be one of the main entrances to the base. Lianping did not break the door open immediately. He used the psychic incarnation in his body to scan the base. Countless robots, automated weapons, computers, lathes, and unknown gigantic weapons entered his eyes one by one. However, he just waited and did not make a move immediately. Also, because psychic chi could not be observed by ordinary people or cameras, he had been standing there the whole time. No one could discover him from the beginning to the end. Until everything was ready, the psyche incarnation's body suddenly trembled. The surging psyche chi was like a raging flame as it surged up from his body. The next moment, he took a step forward. His body turned from illusory to corporeal. Snowflakes flew into the sky at an astonishing speed, creating a straight wave of air. Lianping's psychic incarnation had already crashed into the rock wall. With a loud bang, a large hole was smashed in the rock wall. It was unable to stop Lianping's advance at all. Lianping broke into the base just like that. As far as his eyes could see, there were metal corridors and walls everywhere. A few seconds after he broke in, the entire base had sounded the alarm, and flashing red lights illuminated the entire corridor. Rows of robots with metal skeletons were the first to rush out. Their right hands were all holding cannons that were flashing with blue light. It was a pity that before he could get close to Lianping, he was sent flying by the overwhelming fist force. His body completely disintegrated in midair, turning into countless parts. In fact, even if Lianping didn't do anything, these robots that relied on cameras, infrared, and thermal sensors to observe the world would never discover the existence of the psychic energy incarnation. However, Lianping's purpose in coming here was to completely destroy all the armed forces in the base so that the Xia Dragonfinch could take over. The black psychic energy avatar moved slowly along the corridor. Wherever it passed, be it robots or automated weapons, they were all easily destroyed by it. To Lianping, the only thing he had to be careful of was not to use too much force and accidentally destroy the entire base. On the aircraft carrier, the Divine King's hands kept on sweeping across the control panel. His eyes were fixed on the screen, and drops of cold sweat kept on dripping down from his forehead. Damn it! What is it? What is it that's attacking my base? The screen flickered, and a surveillance camera popped out. It was a corridor, and more than 10 combat robots that were over 2 meters tall and had caterpillar lower bodies were moving rapidly toward the location where the base was being attacked. The robots were equipped with rocket launchers, automatic cannons, and even laser weapons. If a combat unit like this was on the battlefield, it would be able to defeat up to 1,000 people head-on. However, on the screen, these killing machines were like toys that were sent flying into the air. They were torn apart, crushed, and squeezed by an invisible force. From the beginning to the end, the Divine King, who was observing through the surveillance camera, couldn't even see what had destroyed these robots. F***CK, the combat units that were worth tens of millions were instantly destroyed. The Divine King couldn't help but curse. He then shouted, "Red Queen, seal off all the passageways of the base. The core team will retreat according to the original plan. Don't engage in a firefight with the enemy for now." A girl's voice rang out from the computer. "Yes, Master." This was a highly intelligent program called Red Queen. The Divine King had paid a huge price to exchange for her so that he could use her to manage all his units and bases. However, he had another goal, which was to help the Red Queen create a perfect body one day and include her in his harem. As for the current Red Queen, her actual body was placed on an aircraft carrier. Through the satellite that the Divine King had launched himself, she could connect and control all the mechanical units under his command. Therefore, in the eyes of the psychic incarnation, all the combat units on the other side were retreating quickly. The metal gates that connected to the base were closed one after another. Trying to escape? Looking at the metal gates that were closing slowly, the psychic incarnation appeared in front of the gates in a flash. He then reached out an arm and pierced through the alloy gates as easily as passing through tofu. Lianping then grabbed the hole that had been pierced through by the psychic incarnation with both hands. With a slight force, he tore open the alloy gates that weighed several tons. Looking at the mechanical units that were retreating quickly through the metal passageway behind the gates, the psychic incarnation let out a low bellow. A puff of white air accompanied by black psychic incarnation shot toward the retreating troops. Like a white shock wave, the psychic incarnation's violent puff of breath shattered more than half of the mechanical units in front of him into pieces. On the aircraft carrier, the Divine King looked at the shock wave that had suddenly appeared and shouted frantically, "There's something that can turn invisible is attacking the base. Red Queen, scan that location." However, the Red Queen tried several methods, but was unable to detect the psychic incarnation's existence. Be it infrared rays, radar, or thermal imaging, it was difficult to detect the psychic incarnation. After all, only ability users who were level 1 and above could see and sense psychic incarnation. However, Li Anping's psychic incarnation still maintained its physical form. Therefore, when the Red Queen used the sound waves, he was swept out. Target detected by sound wave detection. Establishing model. On the screen, countless numbers flowed like a waterfall. The Red Queen used countless sound waves to scan Li Anping's psychic incarnation. Then, based on the data she received, she established a model of the target based on the data. Soon, a 2-meter-tall, transparent humanoid creature appeared before the Divine King. "Is this the darn thing? It must be an ability user." The Divine King said angrily, "Seal all the exits. Send the TX-1000, Steel Patriot, Zagu, and Thunder God from the Snow Mountain base. Crush him." Following the Divine King's orders, all the exits of the base were sealed by the falling alloy gates. In the depths of the base, many war machines were activated. Under the Red Queen's control, they advanced toward the psychic incarnation. Chapter 290. A few seconds after the Red Queen finished her report, a white figure flew toward the aircraft carrier. The newcomer was completely enveloped by a thick layer of air currents, making it difficult to see what it was that was flying over. At a speed of Mach 10, The high temperature produced by the friction in the air formed a high-temperature vacuum corridor where it passed by, blowing away all the surrounding clouds. A cone-shaped shock wave spread out in all directions with the newcomer as the center. If this flying object were to fly in a city, then just the sonic boom and shock wave it produced would be enough to rupture the eardrums of the people in the city, leaving them with corpses strewn all over the place. Right now, this white meteor-like object was crashing toward the aircraft carrier above the clouds. It was as if the heavens and the earth were colliding. "Get out of the way!" Amidst the king of God's bellows, the Red Queen's alarm, and Sia-Ur's screams, the aircraft carrier's engine started operating rapidly. Blue flames shot out, and the aircraft carrier quickly turned to the side. However, before the king of gods could catch his breath, as the aircraft carrier turned, the unknown object moving at high speed also turned to the side. At this moment, the distance between the two of them was only slightly more than 30 kilometers. In just over 10 seconds, the two of them would collide. "It's too late." The king of gods quickly ordered, "Stop. Put all your energy into the plasma shield. Hold it off." The Red Queen's voice was still unhurried. "Understood." Under her control, the entire aircraft carrier stopped moving, and all its energy was allocated to the plasma shield. The originally colorless and transparent plasma shield was instantly overloaded, and the blue glow grew brighter and brighter. It was as if a layer of blue light had covered the entire aircraft carrier. As the king of gods held his breath and waited, a few seconds passed very quickly. The unknown object was like a white meteor, crashing fiercely into the plasma shield of the aircraft carrier. Amidst an earth-shattering collision sound, it was as if Mars had collided with Earth. First, the terrifying impact was transmitted to the plasma shield. The entire shield flickered, as if it would collapse at any moment. Next, the sound of the collision spread out in all directions. It was a loud sound of over 190 decibels, a terrifying sound that surpassed that of a volcanic eruption. It was the loudest sound that could be transmitted by atmospheric pressure on this planet. And this was only a small part of the energy dissipated from the collision, forming a sonic boom. In the next moment, the plasma shield, which was on the verge of collapse, was like a soap bubble that was constantly being oppressed by this unprecedented collision in the entire history of mankind. Finally, under the gaze of the king of gods, the plasma shield shattered and disappeared completely. With a loud boom, as the plasma shield completely collapsed, the conical shockwave smashed into the aircraft carrier, causing it to tilt backward and leaving countless dents on the surface of the aircraft carrier. Fortunately, after the plasma shield shattered, the unknown material did not continue to crash down at that terrifying speed. Instead, it completely stopped and stood quietly in front of the aircraft carrier. It coldly watched the devastating shockwaves hit the aircraft carrier, causing a second round of destruction. When the aircraft carrier finally stabilized, the king of gods got up from the floor and looked at the display screen nervously. The plasma battery has been completely destroyed. It will take about 2 hours to recharge. The surface armor of the aircraft carrier is damaged by 12%. Engine, weapon system, interceptor, communication system, they're all fine. Before the king of gods could heave a sigh of relief, the Red Queen had already brought up the surveillance footage and reported an unknown humanoid life form has been discovered in front of the spaceship. The king of gods looked at the surveillance footage that the Red Queen had brought up, and his eyes instantly widened. He saw Li Anping standing in midair with his right hand clenched into a fist. It was as if he would punch the aircraft carrier again at any moment. "Li Anping," the king of gods cried out, "It's him. What is he trying to do?" On the screen, Li Anping's right fist was clenched at his waist. With this action, large amounts of air currents in the surroundings were attracted and gathered crazily toward his palm. That fist was like a black hole, crazily engulfing and spitting out the surrounding air. The Red Queen reminded, "High energy reaction detected in front. Damn it, how can Li Anping be so strong?" Recalling the momentum of the other party's attack earlier, the king of gods groaned. How can he be so strong? Xiar also became nervous. "Young master, what should we do?" It seems like he's going to attack again. Don't we have something on him? Why would he attack us? The king of gods roared in fear and anger. How would I know? However, he then instructed the Red Queen, let me talk to him. Yes, master. Li Onping was gathering qi in midair, accumulating power for the air bomb. However, the purpose of his demonstration was very obvious. It was to give the other party a chance to surrender. After all, compared to directly destroying the aircraft carrier, he would rather take over the things in the other party's hands. Just then, a voice came from the aircraft carrier. Li Onping, what are you trying to do? Hearing the other party's voice, Li Onping was unmoved. His palm continued to absorb the surrounding air currents. As more and more air currents were absorbed, the internal pressure, internal energy, and temperature of the air mass also increased rapidly. Its power was also becoming more and more terrifying. The king of gods said in exasperation, have you forgotten that I have evidence? Li Onping, if you don't stop, I'll expose all the evidence and ruin your reputation. Faced with the king of gods' threat, Li Onping only said coldly, surrender or die. The king of gods slapped the control panel and said angrily, this lunatic. However, when the God King saw that Li Onping's energy index was getting higher and higher, and the temperature of the ball of air in Li Onping's palm was getting higher and higher, he quickly turned to Xia and said, Xia, go and give me all the materials for the first stage. Let's see if he still dares to go crazy. The king of gods had already expected the other party to take tough measures, so he had divided the evidence and materials into 5 stages according to the severity of the situation. The first stage was to let the other party know that he was not lying and that he really did have a lot of information in his hands. However, just as the king of gods was looking at Li Onping on the screen and waiting anxiously, he turned his head and saw Xia staring at the screen in a daze, not doing anything. What's going on? Didn't I tell you to upload the information? Xia said blankly, young master, the 8th Research Institute has been found out. What? The king of gods was in disbelief. He pushed Xia away and stared at the computer screen. He kept opening one web page after another, all of which were news about the 8th Research Institute. Underground human experiments, exposed, the main suspect, Sure One, has been arrested. Li Onping is furious and has personally led a team to investigate. A total of 17 clones have been found. All related personnel will be sentenced to death. Latest news, the mysterious sponsor of the Research Institute. The king of gods saw the last headline and clicked on it. Then, he skipped the words in front and kept scrolling down. At the last blank space, a picture of him was pasted on the screen. What kind of joke is this? The king of gods said angrily. Who would believe this kind of thing? However, no matter how much he shouted, it was useless. This was because, in addition to the news from the official channels, the Xia Dragonfinch had also released a lot of other rumors. For example, the 8th Research Institute was researching aliens, and there were UFOs and corpses of aliens stored in it. There are also things like clone armies, biochemical viruses, electronic life forms, and so on. All kinds of rumors that seemed to be true and false were released at the same time. Like a whirlwind, it swept through all the internet channels. Just as the king of gods was hesitating about whether to upload the evidence again, and how many people would believe it among the thousands of other rumors, a thunderous explosion sounded in the sky outside. Li Onping shouted, surrender or die. These 5 words were like a giant hammer that smashed into the king of God's heart, causing his face to turn pale. Chapter 291. The God King, or the Buddha, was just an ordinary fisherman's son before he turned 14. However, on his 14th birthday, something happened that changed his life. He obtained a memory that did not belong to him. The owner of this memory was called Wong Kong, and he came from a world similar to the Buddha's world. However, there were no superpowers there, and the technology was not as advanced as here. However, this person called Wong Kong did not know much about technology, history, or society. He was just a technical secondary school student. After graduation, he had been squatting in an internet cafe and never left. He ate instant noodles and smoked secondhand smoke. He was the king of the internet all day long. Therefore, most of his memories were novels, animations, and games. The two games he especially liked were called StarCraft and Dota. After obtaining Wong Kang's memory, Dabuda did not know whether he was Wong Kong or Dabuda. However, it did not matter to him because in addition to this memory, there was also a so-called system in his body. As long as he completed the missions given by the system in time, he would be able to obtain survival points. Using survival points, he could obtain countless high-tech items that only existed in Wong Kang's imagination. After the two consciousnesses merged, regardless of whether it was a 14-year-old fisherman child or a 16-year-old technical secondary school graduate, they had one thing in common. That was, they were not willing to spend their lives aimlessly. Now that he had the system, he became a traveler in Wong Kang's mind. Ambition began to spread in his heart. First, there was the name. The name Dabuda was too old-fashioned. In Wong Kang's memory, his favorite Dota hero was King of Pantheon. However, he hated the name Dabuda, so he asked others to call him the God King. Then, there were all kinds of songs, novels, and animations that were plagiarized for the other world. With these crossover works, Wong Kong quickly accumulated a lot of wealth and used this wealth to complete the missions given by the system one after another. However, just as he was complacent and thought that the world was in his hands, as his social status gradually increased, he discovered that there were superpowers in this world. The strongest of the superpowers had the power to change the world. Anger, jealousy, and hatred. Although the God King hated the existence of superpowers, he still suppressed it and hid in the dark. While accumulating wealth, he quietly completed missions in exchange for various high-tech items from the system. At first, he suspected that his system was his ability, but he couldn't cultivate psychokinesis. However, none of this was important. The God King believed that even if there were such things as ability users in this world, as long as he had enough time, he would be able to exchange for the great killing weapons in the system one by one. One day, he would be able to rule the world. At that time, his harem, longevity, and endless wealth would all be at his fingertips. But just a year ago, the missions released by the system started to be related to Xia, and almost all of them were against the Xia Dragonfinch. Until recently, the mission was to save Peter Parker. The Divine King had originally intended to push Tian Haowen to the front, but he had not expected the Xia Dragonfinch to discover him. Furthermore, Li Onping's strength had far exceeded his expectations. Impossible. I'm a transmigrator. I should be the main character of this world. How could I possibly lose? The King of Gods stared with bloodshot eyes, like a gambler who had lost everything. He shouted, "Red Queen, send out all the combat units. I'll fight it out with him." "Yes, master." Under Li Onping's gaze, the entire aircraft carrier suddenly changed. As the hatches opened one by one, hundreds and thousands of interceptors flew out. They were like a swarm of locusts, flying toward Li Onping, who was in midair. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky was covered by the countless interceptors. The tens of thousands of interceptors were like a dark cloud, blocking more than half of the sun's rays. This caused the area within a few thousand meters of the aircraft carrier to become dark. This was the God King's greatest reliance. Just the sheer number of interceptors was enough to drown out all resistance. Moreover, the technology of each interceptor was more than 50 years ahead of the human world. It could be said that any one of the interceptors was comparable to the most advanced fighter jets of the human world. Now, this metal torrent made up of countless interceptors, with Li Onping as the center, was like a whirlpool that completely surrounded him. "Li Onping, don't force me. I'll give you one last chance. Let's each take a step back. From now on, we'll mind our own business." "Oomph." With a cold snort, Li Onping broke into a hint of a savage smile. He could not be bothered to listen to what the God King had to say. Li Onping pushed out with his right palm, and the air mass in his palm shot out toward the mechanical army before him. The air mass had just left Li Onping's palm when it started to expand fiercely. It brought with it a terrifying kinetic energy that could tear apart and shatter everything as it charged toward the depths of the interceptors. A rumble rang out. It was as if several 100 million tons of high explosives had exploded at the same time. The atmosphere was instantly torn into pieces, and large swaths of interceptors were deformed and exploded under the terrifying shock wave. They turned into balls of fire and fell toward the sea. The moment they fell into the sea, large amounts of water vapor evaporated from the terrifyingly high temperature. A huge hole appeared in the metal torrent in midair due to this explosion. The shock wave also collided with the aircraft carrier that was close by, pushing the aircraft carrier back by over 100 meters. With Li Anping's attack, the densely packed interceptors in the surroundings reacted. All of them aimed their cannons at Li Anping, who was in the center. In an instant, thousands of blue high-energy laser beams shot toward Li Anping with a high temperature of several thousand degrees Celsius. It was as if they were the light of divine punishment. It was an attack that had no blind spots and was launched at the speed of light. Even Li Anping would find it difficult to completely dodge these high-energy laser beams. However, Li Anping did not think of dodging because he did not need to. Li Anping's current physical body was capable of withstanding several million tons of power. He could fly at Mach 10 with ease. The toughness of his physical body had reached an unbelievable level. Moreover, after being modified by the Hell's Map, the strongest aspect of his physical body was its unprecedented adaptability. It had the ability to adapt to all kinds of environments. Regardless of whether it was ultra-high temperatures or ultra-low temperatures, Li Anping's physical body had an extremely strong resistance to them. Li Anping, who had his eyes closed, was shrouded in countless blue lasers. All the hair on his skin turned to ashes in an instant, and his skin turned red in an instant, like a cooked lobster. However, that was all. While the God King watched excitedly as Li Anping was hit by countless high-energy laser beams, Li Anping, who was at the center of the attack, only felt as if he was soaking in warm water. His surroundings were warm and comfortable. Under this feeling, he even took the initiative to open his eyes. The laser beams that had shot onto his skin hit his eyeballs directly. However, Li Anping's eyes did not react at all. The piercing laser beams were only slightly stronger than sunlight to his eyes, making him unable to see his surroundings clearly. The other party's attacks were even weaker than he had expected. Therefore, Li Anping made his move once again. He let out a bellow, and it was as if a thunderclap rang out in midair. A huge white palm flew out from the bottom toward the sea of machines in the sky. Summer palm. The huge white palm brought with it a power that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Wherever it passed by, thousands upon thousands of interceptors were sent flying. Every second, several hundred interceptors would explode, turning into countless parts and fragments that fell to the ground. The endless number of interceptors were like bees, wrapping around the Anping layer by layer, forming a huge metal sphere. Countless interceptors wriggled on the surface of the sphere. However, as Li Anping struck out with his Sumeru palm, a huge hole was blasted open at the top of the metal sphere. Then, several tens of huge palms struck out fiercely in all directions, with Li Anping as the center. The net that the interceptors had formed was like a rag, instantly breaking apart. Countless interceptors were smashed into smithereens by the various powerful palm forces in the space. With the end of Li Anping's attack, the entire sky seemed to have cleared up. The aircraft carrier's assembly line was still producing interceptors incessantly, and new interceptors could be seen flying out from the aircraft carrier toward Li Anping. However, the overall number of interceptors was less than 1/10 of what it had been at the start. The outcome of the battle was very clear. In the aircraft carrier, the God King sat on the chair with a dejected expression. His eyes were filled with bewilderment and disbelief. Li Anping, who was in midair, looked at the scattered interceptors in the surroundings and opened his mouth slightly. A stream of air current that was like a white laser shot out from his mouth. The strong air current was like a straight sword of light. As Li Anping's neck turned, it swept through the scattered interceptors and destroyed all of them. Li Anping then leaped lightly and stood on the aircraft carrier's armor deck. In this short period of time, his hair, eyebrows, and body hair that had been destroyed by the high-energy laser had grown out once again. Looking at the huge aircraft carrier under his feet, Li Onping pressed both hands on the armored deck and shouted, "Go down." The entire aircraft carrier seemed to groan. However, even though all of the aircraft carrier's engines were running at full speed, they were unable to fend off Li Onping's tremendous strength. The aircraft carrier was being pushed toward the surface of the sea inch by inch. Warning! Warning! External armor has been severely damaged. Warning! Warning! Aircraft carrier's engines are overloaded. Hearing the series of ear-piercing warnings from the Red Queen, the God King ignored them. He only stared at Li Onping on the screen and then pointed at Li Onping, who was outside the aircraft carrier. Great whirlpool. Powerful mental energy gushed toward Li Onping's brain like a huge roaring wave. This was a powerful skill that the God King had exchanged from the system. It was a terrifying ability that originally belonged to the Dark Archon, the Great Whirlpool. It could make use of powerful mental energy to temporarily tear apart a living creature's thoughts, memories, and consciousness, causing the other party to come to a standstill. It was also within the system's high-tech exchange range. However, even the Great Whirlpool, which had always been successful, had failed this time. It was like throwing a stone into the sea. This powerful mental ability had no effect on Li Onping. However, the force field exerted on the aircraft carrier grew stronger and stronger. Although the aircraft carrier struggled with all its might, it was gradually controlled by Li Onping. He seemed to be planning to bring the aircraft carrier back to the Xia. Chapter 292. After Li Onping controlled the aircraft carrier with his nihility force field, he was prepared to pack it up and bring it to the Xia. However, at the same time, he scanned the entire aircraft carrier with his psychic energy and immediately locked onto the God King's position. The moment he locked onto the God King, he felt that something was amiss. The God King and the woman next to him were enveloped in a layer of blue light and were slowly disappearing. It was as if they were about to be teleported away. Li Onping did not know that this was the God King's trump card to save his life, the Star Elf's warp gate technology. However, just by looking at it, he understood that the God King wanted to escape. Seeing that the leader wanted to escape, Li Onping could not be bothered about whether or not he would damage the aircraft carrier. He let out a low bellow, and like an indestructible laser beam, he tore through layer after layer of armor plates and headed straight for the God King's location. The tough alloy that could withstand all sorts of meteorites, rays, and high temperatures in outer space was now as laughable as a plastic toy before Li Onping. With a loud boom, the God King looked up and saw that Li Onping had smashed a big hole in the ceiling of the control room. Like a demon king, Feng Xingjian descended before the God King. Li Onping said coldly, "Stop." Right now, the God King's entire lower body had disappeared in the blue light. When he saw Li Onping, his expression changed and he became anxious. Usually, he would only need 30 seconds to complete the warp gate, but now, it seemed to take an extremely long time. Seeing that the God King was panicking but had no intention of stopping, Li Onping frowned and punched out with his right fist towards Sir, who was next to the God King. With this punch, this beautiful young lady with short red hair was smashed into pieces by the violent air currents before she could even react. A part of her upper body that exploded splattered onto the God King's face, causing him to turn pale. The God King, who had always had a smooth-sailing life and had never encountered any setbacks, was immediately crushed by the cruelty that Li Onping had brought upon him. Seeing the young lady, he doted on being smashed into pieces. The first thing that appeared in his heart was not hatred but fear. It was an instinctive fear of death. At this moment, his ambitions, harem, and reigning supreme over the world had all vanished from his mind. At this moment, these things added together were not as important as his own life. Seeing Li Onping clenching his fists again, the divine king hurriedly shouted, "Red Queen, stop your teleportation." "Yes, master." With the Red Queen's response, the blue light gradually dissipated, and the lower half of the King of Gods reappeared in the aircraft carrier. He looked at the cold-faced Li Onping and immediately said, "Li Onping, please don't kill me." You can capture me, and I definitely won't resist. I can tell you all sorts of knowledge that surpasses this era. I can even help you develop space-based nuclear fusion, collapsing cannons, and invent endless high-tech. Lian Ping's eyes narrowed as he said calmly, I didn't intend to kill you so casually. However, it seems that you have a very conceited personality. Now that I've killed 2 of your women, you're willing to submit to me? The divine king carefully concealed the vengeance and fury in his heart and said with a sincere expression, that was because I didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Now, I know that you're the main character of this world. I'll just follow you. Isn't the Western land's nuclear restriction preventing you from taking any action against them? I have a way to help you resolve this problem. I'll tell you all sorts of technology that surpasses this era. With my help, you'll be able to unify the entire world very soon. Is that so? Li Onping did not comment and only asked calmly, then where did all those high-tech things in your head come from? These spaceships, robots, and those war weapons in your branch base. Could it be that you invented all of them? Hearing Li Onping's question, a hint of hesitation flashed in the divine king's eyes. However, in that moment of hesitation, a high-energy laser shot out from the corner of the wall and pierced through his chest. The divine king looked at the big hole in his chest in disbelief and mumbled, "The Red Queen." Li Onping let out a cold snort and swept away the laser emitter by the wall with a punch. He lowered his head to take a look at the divine king. The divine king's breathing was gradually fading, and his blood was also starting to cool down. There was only endless vengeance in the divine king's eyes. He shouted out in his heart, "Why is Li Onping so strong? Why did the Red Queen betray me? I should be the master of this world. Why? Why is it that even though I possess technology that surpasses this era, I still lost to you natives? The Red Queen has already acknowledged me as her master. Why did she betray me? I can't accept this. I was supposed to have great achievements. Why did I die here? I'm so ruthless. I'm so ruthless." Amidst the endless vengeance, the divine king's gaze gradually turned lifeless. All signs of life disappeared from his body. Li Onping shook his head. He had not expected the divine king to die just like that. If it had been any other attack earlier, he would have been able to stop it. However, when it came to things like lasers, once they were shot out, they would be traveling at the speed of light. There was nothing he could do to stop it. Thinking of what the divine king had said earlier and the Red Queen's reply of "Yes, I'll do as you say," Li Onping frowned and thought. The Red Queen he mentioned earlier. Is it this spaceship's artificial intelligence system? Has this system been hacked by someone else? Or, thinking of this, Li Onping shouted, "The Red Queen, are you the one who killed the divine king?" There was no reply. Not only was there no reply, the Red Queen seemed to have completely disappeared and had given up control of the aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier's engines started to shut down and the power supply started to shut down. All sorts of automated weapons and mechanical units were also disconnected. The entire aircraft carrier sank into silence. If it had not been for Li Onping's nihility force field holding it up, the aircraft carrier would have fallen into the sea. Seeing this, Li Onping vaguely had a bad feeling in his heart. Could it be that this so-called Red Queen has really rebelled? Did she shut herself down? Or did she upload herself somewhere else? With too few clues, Li Onping was unable to determine the situation. After thinking about it, he gave up on the idea of immediately transporting the aircraft carrier back. Instead, he controlled the aircraft carrier and slowly landed it on the nearest uninhabited island. Then, he dived alone at high speed to the underwater base where the Divine King had retreated. Unfortunately, after searching the entire underwater base, he found that, just like the aircraft carrier, all the machines, power supply, and network had been shut down. He could not find any clues. Left with no choice, Li Onping could only transport the aircraft carrier back first. The rest would depend on Xia's staff to take over. Hopefully, they would be able to absorb enough technological information from the aircraft carrier, the Snow Mountain base, and the underwater base, and find clues related to the Red Queen. Chapter 293. 4 weeks later, at the Zhongdu International Airport. As one of the few airports in Xia that had overseas flights, this place was always bustling with people. In the departure lounge, a burly man with a full beard was sitting on a chair. He seemed a little uneasy and kept touching his face subconsciously. Beside him was a young woman. She had long hair and was wearing a professional suit. However, the lady's eyes were filled with coldness, like an iceberg that had been silent for tens of thousands of years. Seeing the man touching his face again, the woman said coldly, "Don't touch your face anymore. You just had plastic surgery. No one will recognize you." The man put down his hand and smiled. "I'm just not used to it. Speaking of which, Miss Dong, or where are we going now?" The lady called Dong, said coldly, "Don't ask too much. You'll know when you see young master." This man with a changed appearance and the iceberg beauty beside him were Dong, and Tian Haowen, who had been sent by the Divine King to capture Tian Haowen. However, for some reason, Tian Haowen had undergone plastic surgery, and his appearance had changed drastically. Tian Haowen looked at Dong, and then at the cold-looking man beside her. His heart was filled with fear. It was this cold-looking man who had found Tian Haowen's location. Using his body that was like liquid metal and indestructible, he had subdued Tian Haowen. Although Tian Haowen's primordial spirit was not afraid of death after it left his body was extremely weak when someone got close to him. Therefore, Tian Haowen was taken away as a hostage and was forced to undergo plastic surgery. The actions of Dong, and the man beside her were also very confusing to Tian Haowen. Tian Haowen had interacted with Dong before. She was a lively, cheerful, and smart woman. However, when they met this time, she was like an iceberg. Unless it was necessary, she would not say a word. No matter what happened, her expression did not change. This gave Tian Haowen a creepy feeling. What made him even more curious was the other party's itinerary. After finding him, the other party did not immediately bring him to the God King. Instead, they circled around the Xia, starting from the Jadeite city all the way north to the central capital, and now they plan to take a plane to Tyrol. Just as Tian Haowen was thinking about this, the television in the waiting room suddenly caught his attention. The human experiment case has come to an end. Mastermind Sherwin, Summerdew, Osborne, execute him. When he saw the news about the 8th Research Institute, Tian Haowen exhaled deeply. Li Anping's boldness, execution, and control of the entire Xia government made him secretly shocked. At this moment, Dong stood up and said coldly, "Let's go. Our plane has arrived." New Dongyang, West 69th District. Sherwin stood on a certain high ground, his eyes looking down, a hint of excitement flashing in his eyes. A new research institute would be built here. Not only would it be larger and more complex than the original 8th Research Institute, but it would also digest and analyze the technology obtained from the God King, from the aircraft carrier to the God King's corpse. Everything would be carried out here. On the plains, terrifying monsters were building according to the blueprints under the command of Tikachi. They either manipulated earth and rocks, had extraordinary strength, or melted gold and boiled iron. Their efficiency was countless times faster than ordinary engineering teams. Sherwin estimated that in less than 2 months, the new research institute would be completed. It would be a huge underground facility with 49 floors. At the same time, it would shoulder the research of biology, machinery, abilities, and other aspects. However, according to Li Anping's arrangements, cloning ability users, artificial intelligence, and monster cells, which are gray cells, would be the 3 main focuses of the new research institute. The professor beside him kept fiddling with the tablet in his hand and teased, "Don't you want to read the news about yourself? You're going to be executed." Sherwin said impatiently, "How long are you going to joke about this? It's just a clone." The professor smiled. "Oh, a clone? How can you be sure that he's a clone and you're the main body? Could it be that the one who died was the main body and you're the one who was cloned to continue the research?" Sherwin was stunned. Just as he was about to retort, he saw the professor laughing and walking away. This lunatic. After the professor left, a big black hole suddenly appeared in front of Sherwin. Emma slowly crawled out from it. She still had her hair tied up in a ponytail and was wearing sportswear that looked like a student's uniform. She gave off a feeling of invincibility in youth. The only difference was that she was carrying a long object wrapped in layers of cloth on her back. When she saw Sherwin in front of her, she greeted him, "Hi." Sherwin nodded and said respectfully, "Madam Emma, is there anything I can help you with?" After Emma returned from the moon, she had also helped a lot with the relocation of the 8th Research Institute. She was the one who opened a teleportation gate from West 69 District to Tianjin. This greatly sped up the relocation process. She also contributed a lot to the relocation of the underwater base and the Snow Mountain base. "It's nothing," Emma said helplessly. "Have you seen Lianping?" She pointed at her back and said, "I've been carrying this for almost 2 weeks. When will he come out, so that I can return it to him?" "Well," Sherwin thought for a moment and said uncertainly, "something seems to have happened to Lord Bai Xinghe." After the two of them went to East 54 District, they haven't contacted us anymore. But they should be back soon, right? Looking at Sherwin's uncertainly face, Emma sighed helplessly. Lianping said that the adamantium longsword on her back was very important and asked her to give it to his clone in person. However, after she came to New Danyang City, Lianping's psychic clone disappeared together with Bai Xinghe. Since she had to help with the construction of the Research Institute, she could only take care of the sword every day. Yes, because Lianping had used his psychic clone too many times, he had half disclosed it to some of his subordinates. However, Lianping did not tell them the exact abilities of the psychic clone. At this moment, Emma's communicator rang. She said directly, got it, I'm coming." The next moment, Emma took a step forward and dashed into a pitch-black portal. Then, her eyes lit up and she arrived at the construction site. Beside her, Tucci Oda pointed at the engineering blueprint and gestured to Emma while saying something. A few minutes later, a black circular portal with a diameter of about 200 meters appeared in the sky above the construction site like a pancake. A portal of the same size appeared a few kilometers away. The portal in the sky above the construction site descended. As the portal descended, a hole seemed to have been opened in the ground. All the soil, stones, and plants that came into contact with the portal were teleported a few kilometers away. As the portal continued to descend, a huge hole was formed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Emma's method of digging a hole was much faster than any modern technology. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. The entire construction site was starting to look decent. With the help of 2 level 5 ability users, Emma and the doctor, as well as countless large and small monsters of different abilities. The construction speed here was probably equivalent to 1 or 2 months in other places. And on this night, Emma received another message from Lianping. He asked her to use the portal ability to prepare to cut the adamantium longsword and send a blueprint. However, he did not ask her to start immediately. Instead, he asked her to practice according to the blueprint. After all, this was the only adamantium longsword that the Xia had. In this world, there were no more than 5 people who could perfectly cut adamantium, and Emma's portal was one of them. However, Emma had never specially trained in this kind of meticulous skill. Her teleportation portal was used to cut people directly, and she had never used it to process things like swords and sabers. Therefore, she still needed to practice more. While the construction site of the new Research Institute was in full swing, in the East 54th District, several hundred kilometers away from the West 69th District, all the animals or monsters within a radius of several kilometers had disappeared. A black stream of psychic energy rose from the ground like a smoke signal and rushed straight to the sky, several thousand meters high. Chapter 294. The pure, black manifestation of his mental power was holding the sword of Tatsuka in his hand. The black mental power was flowing in and out of the sword of Tatsuka, while the body of the sword of Tatsuka was emitting weird brilliance. Ominous vibes were popping up from Li Onping and the Sword of Tatsuka. Li Onping kept telling Li Onping the results of his thousands of experiments. Countless data flashed in Li Onping's brain and turned into formulas in the end. Looking at the Sword of Tatsuka in his hand, he slowly withdrew his mental power and ended the scanning of the Sword of Tatsuka. Li Onping nodded his head. It should be similar to what we expected. Now, we just need to wait for Emma to finish the model and build a new Sword of Tatsuka. Then, we will know the result. Bai Xinghe was confused. Isn't it too wasteful to use adamantium as the material for the first experiment? It doesn't matter. I've designed two of them. One is a long sword, and the other is a sword made of the materials cut off. Li Onping explained, besides, with our method, I don't think that the common materials except for adamantium will be able to withstand it. We can only make half-finished products. Bai Xinghe nodded his head and began to discuss martial arts again. Recently, including the time when Li Onping's real body came, the two of them were probably the experts who had the deepest understanding of the ancient arts in the world. They had never given up on the unification of all the secret martial arts. After knowing that it was impossible to unify all the ancient arts by force, they focused on another matter. The two of them turned their attention to another matter, and that was to think of a way to create a few powerful, quick, and secret martial arts that could combine most of the same kind of ancient abilities. According to their functions, the secret martial arts were mainly focused on defense, release, melee, speed, and stealth. Li Onping was responsible for sorting and analyzing the data of various sects, while Li Onping provided constructive suggestions based on his own experience. Li Onping then tested them with his immortal body. As a result, while they were analyzing the Sword of Tatsuka, they had basically created the framework of two secret martial arts, one of which was for defense and the other for speed. Among them, the protective type was called the protective upstanding current. It was a combination of modern technology and dozens of secret martial arts, such as the Golden Bell Shield, the Iron Skin Shirt, the Vajra Unbreakable Divine Skill, the Immortal Dharma, the Grandson Rebirth Skill, and other secret martial arts. Not only was it fast and powerful, but its defensive power was also comparable to the ability to turn oneself into a metal man. The one for speed was named Qi Manipulation by Li Onping. It was based on the explosion of one's muscles and mental power to achieve high-speed movement. Li Onping was already an expert of the experts. Li Onping was an expert. Li was already an expert of experts. If Li Onping and Bai Xinghe could not guarantee that they could advance to the 5th level of energy with the body-protecting streams, Li Onping was certain that it was possible for them to advance to the 5th level of energy with the technique of Qi manipulation. The key was to persevere. Besides, it was only the first version of the Qi manipulation technique. Li Onping and Bai Xinghe would modify it and make it even more excellent. The aptitude for training was something that Li Onping and Bai Xinghe had to consider. Otherwise, what was the difference between the secret martial arts and the others? It would be meaningless for them to create the martial arts. Therefore, both the protective aura and the Qi manipulation technique required very little aptitude. What mattered the most was persistence and hard work. How do you plan to promote the secret martial arts? Bai Xinghe suddenly asked. These martial arts can give ordinary people the strength of superhumans. If you promote them casually, if I hesitate, how can I change the world? Li Onping said confidently. Even if all the people in Xia become superhumans, I'm confident that I can control them. Pausing for a moment, Li Onping continued. My plan is that these secret martial arts will be used as teaching materials for the students of Academy City. As for the ordinary people, I plan to hold a martial art competition to increase their influence. Li Onping knew very well that secret martial arts had existed since ancient times. But why were there so few people practicing them? Aptitude was one thing. Fighting ability was another. For most people, it was not useful in their daily life. Therefore, the promotion of the government was not enough. Therefore, Li Onping planned to hold a martial arts competition that was worldwide. Anyone could sign up for it. As for the prize for the champion, It would be a secret martial art that he would teach in person. A martial arts competition. Bai Xinghe nodded and said, "If the government cooperates with the promotion, it will indeed be very influential. There will be a lot of people practicing martial arts all over the world. But can superhumans sign up for the competition, too?" "Of course. I plan to divide the participants into two groups, superhumans and superhumans." Li Onping said, "The champion of both groups will receive a secret martial art that I will teach in person." Bai Xinghe laughed. "A worldwide martial art competition? How exciting!" Bai Xinghe could imagine that after the martial arts competition came to an end, countless young people in the Eastern continent would start practicing secret martial arts, let alone those in the Western continent. With that kind of strength, Li Onping could choose a part of the secret martial arts and spread them out. In a few years, he would have countless experts in his hands. While the psychic energy clone was discussing with Bai Xinghe, Li Onping's original body was attending a meeting in Tianjin. The meeting was about the imperial election in Xia this year. Other than the leaders and representatives of the 9 royal families, there were also several high-level officials and generals of Xia's government. It could be said that these people were currently assisting Li Onping in ruling the entire empire. As for the contents of the imperial selection, although everyone present knew that Li Onping would ascend to the throne, they still had to put on an act. They still had to go through the selection process like they had in the past. No one thought that the other candidates could defeat Li Onping. At the conference table, Li Onping held a stack of documents in his hands. On it was the plan for the imperial election. Although the leaders had already gone through it, they did not have much interest in the arrangement this time. However, when the plan was handed to Li Onping, the entire conference table fell silent. Everyone waited quietly for Li Onping's reply. In the large conference room, only the sound of Li Onping flipping through the pages could be heard. Beside Li Onping, the head of the Li family, Li Wei, was looking at his nose with concern, as if he was in a trance. Ever since Li Onping had taken control of the entire Great Xia dynasty, the Li clan was the first of the 9 great royal clans to submit to Li Onping. Immediately, they had the merit of supporting the emperor, and their value had increased by 100 times. In just 1 or 2 years, they had become a family that was second only to the Wang family. Even the Wang family was unwilling to confront the Li family most of the time. However, that was also the reason why Li Wei knew that the future of the Li family was all based on Li Onping. Hence, no matter what he did, he would always follow Li Onping's wishes, including those of the Li family. He could be considered Li Onping's most hardcore supporter in Xia's political situation. At this moment, Li Onping put down the document in his hand. The head of the Song family, Song Guozhong, smiled obsequiously and said, "Lord, is there anything you're dissatisfied with? If there is, we'll get someone to change it immediately." Wang Chong, who was at the side, was full of disdain. The Song family had once offended Li Onping greatly because of Song Bang. Although Li Onping had not dealt with the Song family much since he took over the throne. However, just because they had subconsciously distanced themselves from the Song family with the other 8 royal clans, they had already caused great losses to the Song family over the past year. Besides, Song Guozhong, who was initially strongly opposed to Li Onping, became a bootlicker. On the surface, he seemed to be the most obedient to Li Onping. However, no one knew exactly what he was thinking. Li Onping glanced at Song Guozhong and did not reply to him. Instead, he said directly, "Cancel the imperial selection. Since I'm going to be the king of Xia, there's no need for the imperial selection to exist." But Wang Chong frowned and wanted to dissuade him, but Li Onping stopped him with his hand. "Wang Chong will pass the throne to me directly. The specific ceremony and arrangements will be up to you to decide." Wang Chong wanted to persuade him again, but he was stopped by Xiao and Ran. He looked back and found Xiao and Ran shaking his head at him. He then looked around and saw that all the clan leaders and ministers were like clay statues. They did not have the slightest opinion on Li Onping's words. This was the current situation in Xia. The entire imperial court had become Li Onping's sole authority. Usually, they could put forward their opinions, But once Li Onping decided on something, the only thing they could do was to try their best to do it well. Thinking about how this had never happened when he was on the throne, Wang Chong sighed in his heart and took the order. Chapter 295. 2 months later, Amest Federation, Liberty City. As one of the busiest cities in the Amest Federation, Liberty City had the largest population in the Western continent. It was also the most diverse city. There were people and immigrants from more than 70 countries, and more than 500 languages were spoken here. It had the most advanced subway network in the world, providing 24-hour service. As one of the economic, cultural, financial, and political centers of the Western continent, this world-class city had a great influence. It was once known as the center of the world. However, no matter how prosperous a place was, there would still be dark corners. On the outskirts of Liberty City, in a huge warehouse, countless spectators were yelling excitedly. In the middle of the crowd was a cage surrounded by barbed wire. In the cage, 2 strong white men were fighting to the death. Underground boxing, where fighters from all over the world gathered. Most of them participated in the battles for money. The luckier ones would gradually become famous and even get invited to formal fighting competitions, earn enough money, and finally retire. However, most of the unlucky ones could only disappear from the stage with a body full of injuries and a meager appearance fee. As the spectators yelled, the fight in the arena became more intense. One of the fighters was suddenly punched in the head, followed by a storm of attacks. When he fainted on the ground, he had completely lost consciousness. After the 10-second countdown, the referee raised the winner's hand. It was a white man who was more than 2 meters tall, with marble-like muscles and a beast-like face. On his back was a tattoo of a roaring lion. When the referee raised his arm to announce the winner, the audience cheered. Lion King! Lion King! Lion King! In the lounge, the black fighter, nicknamed Lion King, was slowly unbandaging his hand. At this moment, a black man walked into the lounge, laughing. "Hey, Jason, we won again. This is your appearance fee." As he spoke, the black man handed a stack of money to Jason. Jason just accepted it silently without saying anything. However, the black man did not mind. He was already used to Jason's indifference. As long as Jason could fight and help him earn money, he did not care about his personality. The black man patted the muscles on Jason's back and said with a smile, "Jason, my brother, you can't imagine what happened. Let me tell you a piece of good news. MMA has invited us. Ha ha, I have already booked a flight for you tonight. Get ready. Just the appearance fee for a match, there is 100,000. As he spoke, he patted the muscles on Jason's arm, his face full of excitement. However, when Jason heard the news, he sighed and said calmly, "I'm sorry, I'm afraid I can't participate in MMA." "What?" The black man looked at Jason in confusion. "Are you kidding me? That's MMA. Even if you lose, you can still get 20,000 yuan per round, my brother. Besides, you're sure to win." Jason replied indifferently. "I've already booked a flight for this weekend. I'm going to Xia. I'm afraid today will be my last match." "Are you kidding me?" The black man looked at Jason in disbelief and suddenly screamed. "D****, you're not really planning to participate in that fighting competition, are you? The world's first unrestricted fighting competition. I want to go and see it." Jason's face showed a trace of longing. The black man scolded and shouted, "Are you stupid? Do you really believe in that magic and witchcraft? I heard that the people in Xia don't even have toilets. Maybe you'll be infected and die the moment you get off the plane. It's superpower. It's not witchcraft." Jason did not explain further. In this era, the people of the Western continent, especially the 3 superpowers, had a natural sense of superiority towards the Eastern world. Whether it was the official propaganda or their own impression, the Eastern world was always a poor and backward country. Some time ago, there were rumors about superpowers. It was also a sign of their superstition and feudalism. Looking at the black man who was still complaining, Jason shook his head, put away his backpack, and walked out of the lounge. He also did not know what the Eastern world and Xia were like. Whether superpowers existed or not, he was not sure. But no matter what, he wanted to give it a try. It was just to obtain more power, to obtain the power to control his own destiny. The feeling of every cell in the body pursuing power was something that ordinary people could not understand. Tianjin Airport. Among the sea of people, a 14 or 15-year-old boy was looking around with rapt attention. Whether it was the endless stream of people or the majestic airport hall, there were all kinds of advanced facilities that he had never seen before. They were all things that he had never seen before in his hometown. Behind the boy was a skinny middle-aged man who looked malnourished. The man touched the boy's head and said happily, "How is it, Shilon? How is Tianjin?" "It's much better than where we are, master. But there are so many powerful guys." The boy's eyes showed a trace of curiosity and excitement. He kept looking at the black and white people. These guys all looked strong and powerful. Their eyes were filled with coldness and vigilance. The boy, Shilon, said with excitement and worry, "Are they all participating in the unrestricted fighting competition?" "Probably not all of them." The middle-aged man said, "We're the ones who came early. Next week is Li Anping's coronation. The fighting competition will be in 2 weeks." Saying this, the middle-aged man sniffed and said, "These guys have a strong smell of blood on them. They're probably here for the coronation." Shilon nodded, not fully understanding. He suddenly asked, "Then, master, can we go and watch the ceremony?" "Of course not." A bespectacled young man in a suit and leather shoes ran over from behind. When he heard what Shilon said, he immediately refused and said, "You guys be careful. This is Great Xia. Don't speak carelessly. You'll embarrass our sister." This was SDA's diplomat who had accompanied Shilon and his master here. As a small inland country in the southernmost part of the eastern continent, STA was perhaps the poorest country in the southern border. Their current emperor was someone who admired experts and worshipped the strong. Unfortunately, STA was small and weak. There were very few experts, and the strongest were only 2 ability users at the 4th level. This time, when he heard that Li Anping was going to organize an unrestricted fighting competition, he insisted on organizing one in his own country as well. Then, he would send a champion to participate in Great Xia's competition and obtain a good ranking. It was obvious that Shilon and his master were sent out under such circumstances. The diplomat kept nagging at them. "Remember, when you meet the people from the Xia coming to pick you up, don't say anything. Just leave everything to me. Also, don't use your abilities recklessly. This is the Xia. Don't cause trouble for me and cause a diplomatic dispute. Also, don't keep looking around like you haven't seen the world. Remember, respect other countries' customs and traditions. Don't interfere in their internal affairs." These have been repeatedly emphasized before boarding the plane. Although Shilon and his master didn't refute him, they looked absent-minded. It wasn't clear how much they had heard. However, they had indeed been repeatedly taught not to use their abilities recklessly. Ever since Li Anping publicized the existence of ability users, everyone in Xi'an knew about the existence of superpowers. The management of superpowers was stricter than before. It could be said that all of Xia's native ability users were strictly monitored. However, after being subjected to stricter control than before, they also received more benefits. First of all ability users would participate in training. The most outstanding people would be assigned to the legendary Academy City, personally supervised by Li Anping to receive the most elite education. After graduation, they would directly join the Xia Dragonfinch. They would receive hundreds of thousands of yuan every month during their studies. The remaining ability users would be assigned to ability user schools run by the 9 royal families based on their talents, qualifications, and various tests. After graduation, they would either join the police, the military, or other violent organizations. Of course, there were also those who were completely unsuited for combat who would be selected for civilian jobs. It could be said that since last year, all of the Xia's native ability users either belonged to the government or were locked up in prison. There were also those who didn't want to work for the government. Sorry, the government would give you generous subsidies and benefits, but you would be under the government's supervision for the rest of your life. You would have to report in advance if you wanted to leave the country or go to other places. Of course, Shilon guessed that there would definitely be some ability users hiding into Xia. However, once an ability user broke through to the first energy level, they would have psychic energy. Unless they were stuck at level 0 for the rest of their lives, it was only a matter of time before they were exposed. At this moment, a great Xia official came over to them with a welcoming sign in his hand. When the diplomat saw this, he immediately went up to greet him with a face full of smiles. He happily chatted with the other party. Although Shilon had learned a little the Xia language before, STA was close to Baiyue. The official language had always been Baiyue's language, so he couldn't really understand what the two were talking about. He only saw that the diplomat, who was usually arrogant, was now nodding and bowing. After chatting for a while, he followed behind the other party. He turned around and shouted, "You too! Hurry up and catch up. Remember, after checking into the hotel, don't run around. If there's anything, remember to report to me." As for the competition, he didn't mention it. The two people in front of him might be top-notch experts in STA, but in a big country like the Xia, there were simply too many experts. He didn't have any expectations for Shilon and the others to get a place in the competition. Shilon shrugged and didn't take it to heart. He swept his gaze to the side again. He didn't know when, but a few staff members in blue and white uniforms had faintly appeared in the surroundings. Seeing their uniforms, Shilon heard his master beside him mumble, "The Xia Dragonfinch's people." Chapter 296. Surprise flashed through Shilan's eyes. So strong, they're all level 4 ability users. More than 10 Dragon Sparrow guards in blue and white uniforms passed by and entered the green passageway without attracting the attention of the crowd. They were all level 4 ability users. Although they didn't attract the attention of ordinary people, all the ability users in the airport changed their expressions. People like Shilon, who came from a small country, exchanged glances with each other, their faces solemn. That group of Dragon Sparrow guards already had the power to overthrow their country. In the green passage, the person in second place among the Dragon Sparrow guards was a baby-faced young man. It was Wang Ke, who had followed Li Onping to visit Hundred Moon Country. He was an outstanding descendant of the Wang family. He smiled and said to Zhuomai, "Boss, there are really many powerful people in the airport. Mercenaries, secret agents, black market fighters, martial artists, soldiers. All kinds of monsters are here." Zhuomai knew this was Wang Ke's ability. The Wang family's bloodline ability was called Hypnosis Wave, which could hypnotize ordinary people in a large area. It could also read the consciousness fragments of people in their daily lives. It was obvious that he had read some of the consciousness fragments when he passed by the hall. Zhuomai said casually, "Don't worry about them. Audrey is in charge of them. We just have to do our own thing." "Yes." Wang Ke nodded. Soon, a few tall blonde men who looked like polar bears appeared on the other side of the passage. Seeing these blonde men who were so strong that their muscles were bigger than normal people's, the Dragon Sparrow guards weren't surprised at all, because according to the notice, these people were from the Knudsen family, one of the 4 aristocratic families in the Ice Fortress. This family's ability was called Berserk Wolf. It was a type of ability that, after using it, the ability user would turn into a half-wolf, half-human form. This ability user, when in human form, had extremely high strength, endurance, speed, and recovery. After turning into a werewolf, these values would greatly increase. In addition to the sharp claws and teeth, as well as various secret techniques, the Nuvizin family had been one of the strongest families in the Ice Castle for hundreds of years. For example, Wolf, whom Li Onping had killed in the underworld, was a member of the Nuvizin family. When the blonde leader saw Zhuomai, he immediately walked out and patted Zhuomai's shoulder. He smiled and greeted him. Zhuomai asked, "Ivan, are they behind us?" The golden-haired man called Ivan grinned like a big bad wolf. He beckoned to his companions behind him. Under the escort of several burly men, a slender man with his hands and feet shackled and a black cloth covering his head appeared in front of Zhuomai. The man's upper body was bare to the waist, and there were many wounds on his body. As he walked, drops of blood could be seen seeping out of the wounds from time to time. That's him. Zwamai frowned. That's him, the leader of the Bloodborne, the younger brother of the Bloodborne, Serhi Dacula. Ivan revealed a cruel expression. He's not easy to capture. We lost many of our men. Fortunately, the Dacula family has already given up on him. Otherwise, it would be even more troublesome. The Dacula family was the Bloodborne's family, and they were also one of the 4 major aristocratic families in the Ice Fortress. The Bloodborne was a resistance organization located in the northern Ice Fortress, just like the Avengers and the Holy War. They had planned a series of assassinations and terrorist activities to target the Ice Fortress's policy of joining Xia. Ivan then smiled as Zwamai. The leader said that this is a gift for His Majesty Li Onping's ascension to the throne. We've already wiped out all the members of the Bloodborne. We'll always welcome His Majesty's arrival. Thank you, Leader Nuizen. His Majesty is very satisfied with this gift. Zwamai nodded and waved his hand. The Dragon Sparrow guards behind him had already surrounded Serhi and taken him away. What awaited him was either immediate execution or being sent to New Danyang as a specimen for the Research Institute. In short, with his death, there was one less organization that opposed Xia. In addition to the Avengers that were eliminated, the only organization that still had some influence was the Holy War in Nanjiang. However, Yinbei had already left for Baiwa last week. Over there, Fang Yuhuang had also promised to personally lead a team to completely eliminate the Holy War. Zwamai believed that before Li Onping ascended to the throne, all the resistance forces in the Eastern world would be wiped out. This was a general trend that couldn't be stopped. After escorting Sergei to Great Xia, Ivan seemed to heave a sigh of relief in his heart as he teased. I heard that after His Majesty ascends to the throne, there will be an unrestricted fighting competition in 2 weeks. I wonder if we can participate? Zwamai replied, of course you can. There are no requirements to participate in this competition. However, if you want to participate, you can only participate in the ability user category. Ivan heard this and nodded excitedly. Then he asked hesitantly, I wonder if anyone from the Xia Dragonfinch will participate in this competition. Zwamai knew what he was thinking, so he said straightforwardly, no one from the Xia Dragonfinch will participate in this competition. Ivan and his companions immediately became excited when they heard this. They rubbed their hands together as if they were ready for the competition. Wang Ke shook his head in disdain. The things that the foreign ability users fought for, whether it was the prize money or the secret martial arts, were all things that the Xia Dragonfinch could easily obtain. It must be noted that Bai Xinghe had already distributed more than a dozen secret martial arts, including the aura protection and the chi control technique, a month ago. He allowed the ability users of the Xia Dragonfinch to choose and learn. Among these martial arts, other than the aura protection and the chi control technique that were specially recommended, the rest were all things that he had specially selected and were easier to learn. After the other secret martial arts were created, the Xia Dragonfinch would be among the first batch of people to practice them. Then it would be Academy City and the schools of the 9 royal families. Finally, it would be the ordinary people in the periphery. Even so, Li Onping estimated that the people who were not from the Xia would have a much slower progress due to the lack of guidance and all kinds of information. It cannot be helped. The only people who could keep up with the progress were probably the disciples of the big sects in the 100 Moons. However, for Li Onping, it did not matter. The entire Eastern continent, or even the entire world, would gradually merge and become a country in the future. Everyone would be under his strict control and live their lives as they should. This was his utopia. The promotion of the secret martial arts was only to increase the combat ability of the utopia so that it would not be destroyed by external factors. The League of Stars, the Federation, Tyrol, and so on. These forces had never really caught Li Onping's attention. Right now, the only thing that really caught his attention was the demon race. Chapter 297. New Danyang, District 42 West. This area was originally a city on Danyang Island. However, it had now become a large area of ruins. The broken streets and empty buildings looked like a scene from the end of the world. Because of the unknown creatures hiding in the darkness, this place had become one of the most dangerous areas in the world. However, Xia Yunyun and Xia Laikong were like two tourists, walking casually on the ruined streets. Xia Laikong asked curiously, "How is it? Did you find it?" "No." Xia Yunyun shook her head. Suddenly, her eyes moved. She saw a gray shadow swooping down from the sky at high speed and hovering in front of Xia Yunyun. It was a large bird that looked like a woodpecker, but it was covered in gray feathers. Judging from the speed it swooped down just now, it was far faster than ordinary birds. This was an animal that Xia Yunyun had subdued in New Danyang. It was a strange bird that was named the mystic bird by its discoverer. The mystic bird circled Xia Yunyun and chirped. Xia Yunyun nodded and shook her head from time to time. She was communicating with the mystic bird through her ability. Xia Yunyun's ability had reached the 4th energy level after a long time of hard work. Combined with the mutation of her psychic chi at the 4th energy level, Xia Yunyun finally discovered a new change. That was, on the basis of communication, Xia Yunyun could begin to control animals. In the past, even with this new change, Xia Yunyun's ability was still very weak. However, countless unprecedented monsters or animals had gathered in New Danyang. They had become a shortcut for Xia Yunyun to increase her strength. And Xia Yunyun's trip this time was to capture a monster that was suitable for her and could strengthen her so that she could get a good ranking in the fighting tournament. She was not a member of the Xia Dragonfinch's team, so she could still participate in the competition. However, her current strength was far from enough to obtain a good ranking in a competition filled with experts, even though she had been training under Xia Liekong's guidance recently. After communicating with Xian Yao for a while, Xia Yunyun nodded and said to Xia Laikong, "It's right ahead. Let's go." "Yes." Xia Laikong gently waved his hand, and 2 whirlwinds appeared beneath their feet, lifting them up. "Let the mystic bird lead the way." The 2 of them followed the mystic bird and soared into the sky, flying toward the street in the distance. Xia Yunyun flew in front, commanding the mystic bird while telling Xia Laikong where they were. Xia Laikong, on the other hand, controlled the airflow beneath their feet and constantly changed their direction. He looked at Xia Yunyun with both relief and regret in his eyes. He was relieved that his granddaughter had finally become sensible and had embarked on the path of pursuing strength. In order to become stronger, she was even willing to come to such a desolate place. He was regretful that Xia Yunyun wanted to become stronger. Although she did not say it directly, Xia Laikong was old and experienced, and he also had the Phantom Dragon ability, so how could he not see it? The reason why Xia Yunyun wanted to become stronger was because she wanted to meet that person. However, although that person was a peerless expert, in Xia Liekong's opinion, he was definitely not a good choice for a husband. However, in this matter, even if Xia Laikong had the power of the 5th level, he could not do anything. Thinking of this, Xia Laikong could only sigh, but he did not change his choice. At this moment, Xia Yunyun shouted, "Over there!" Xia Liekong's eyes focused, and the powerful psychic energy of the 5th level swept across. In a small alley in the distance, a silver-white lion was crawling on the ground, letting out painful roars. On its body, layers of black, mucus-like things were wriggling nonstop as if they were alive, starting from its forehead and slowly spreading to the back of its body. It seemed to want to swallow the silver-white lion whole. Tianjing Sky Garden Hotel. As the hotel with the highest standards in Xia, this hotel had always been used to entertain foreign guests and the higher-ups of Xia. Not only was the price high, but not just anyone could enter. Even if ordinary people had money, if their level was not high enough, they would definitely not be able to enter. However, at this moment, the revolving restaurant on the highest floor of the hotel was booked by someone. Other than a table by the window, everything in the restaurant had been cleared. At this only table, Li Qian and Li Anping were sitting on the left and right. The table was filled with all kinds of dishes and wine. The 2 of them were like a married couple who had not seen each other for a long time, eating silently and chatting about interesting news from time to time. Downstairs, a group of staff members were listening to their conversation and recording it down. They were all experts in psychology, sociology, physiology, and many other subjects. After that, they would complete a report on Li Qian's mental state for Li Onping to review. Li Qian's ability was very important to the current Xia. Before Li Onping could find a replacement, and before there was a breakthrough in artificial intelligence, Li Qian's ability was very precious. Because of personal reasons, unless it was absolutely necessary, Li Onping was not willing to use violence to control her. Li Onping put down his cutlery, took out a tissue to wipe his mouth, and looked at Li Qian gently. "What's wrong? You don't like to eat these?" Li Qian shook her head and looked out the window. From this position, they could see the night view of Tianjin city center. Countless lights intertwined to create a bustling scene. Li Onping looked at Li Qian's expression and grabbed her hand on the table. Li Qian struggled for a bit, and her face was slightly flushed, but she let him grab her hand. "You're not happy?" Seeing Li Qian lowered her head and did not answer, Li Onping slowly said, "You heard about the marriage?" That's just for stability." Li Onping said lightly, "They're not like you." Li Onping's superhuman vision, hearing, and smell allowed him to clearly see Li Qian's heartbeat, blood, endocrine, and even hormones. Therefore, he frowned imperceptibly. Then, he suddenly stood up and walked behind Li Qian. Under the surprised gaze of the other party, he hugged Li Qian from behind. "I heard from Momo that the newspaper's intelligence network has covered 60% of the country during this period. Thank you for your hard work." The unique warmth of a man rose in Li Qian's ears and dyed her cheeks red. Downstairs, the screen kept refreshing Li Qian's various indicators: heartbeat, endocrine, blood pressure. After a long time, a researcher said, "It's done, Your Majesty." Li Onping's ears moved, and he gently let go of Li Qian in his arms. He smiled and touched Li Qian's head and said softly, "Your birthday is in a month. Do you want something?" Li Qian smiled like a little girl. "Don't tell me in advance." She stood up and walked in front of Li Onping. Suddenly, she gently pecked Li Onping's cheek, and in the next moment, she flew away like a little bird. Her bell-like laughter echoed in the dining room. "Give me a surprise." Li Onping looked at Li Qian's happy expression and laughed as well. Only the depths of his eyes were still like an iceberg, full of indifference and coldness. The phone rang. Lu Sheng's eyes were still staring at the screen, and he answered the phone without turning his head. However, after a few words, his expression changed drastically, and he began to have an intense conversation with the person on the other side of the phone. A few minutes later, as if he had lost his family fortune, he hung up the phone with an ugly expression. After thinking about it, he picked up the phone again and made 2 calls. Half an hour later, Lu Feng and Yang Guang walked hurriedly to Lu Sheng's office. A team member waved his hand to greet the two, but found that they ignored him and just left with nervous expressions. Lu Feng pushed open the office door, and Yang Guang impatiently squeezed in, then closed the door. He looked at Lu Sheng with a serious expression and asked, "Have you confirmed it?" Seeing Lu Sheng nod, Lu Feng said angrily, "What's going on? Didn't we already send people to follow them? How could something still happen? Have you found out who did it?" Lu Sheng also said regretfully, "In order not to attract attention, we didn't send any ability users. We were supposed to be back in 2 weeks, but who would have thought that someone would be so daring?" Yang Guang said, "Could it be someone from the Federation?" Lu Sheng shook his head. "That's impossible. They should be the ones who want to buy time the most. How could they take the initiative to provoke us?" Lu Feng disagreed. "The Federation isn't a one-man federation. There might be people who are desperate to take risks. We have to be prepared for this possibility. If it's really them, then what's their purpose? This time's ascension?" Yang Guang asked. Just as the 3 of them were discussing intensely again, the office door was opened. Lu Feng said without turning his head, "Who let you in?" However, he heard Lu Sheng say with an ugly expression, "Your Majesty." The 3 of them looked in the direction of the office door at the same time and saw Li Onping opening the door and walking into the office. "What's going on?" Only then did the 3 of them remember that Li Onping was overseeing the entire Tianjing, and there was almost nothing that he couldn't detect. Seeing that the three of them were silent, Li Onping looked at Lu Sheng and said, "You speak." Under the pressure of his gaze, Lu Sheng sighed and said bitterly, "2 weeks ago, Miss Anna went to the Western continent as an exchange student of the Federation's Central University. The protection personnel arrived about an hour ago." At this point, Lu Sheng couldn't help but pause and finally sighed. They lost contact with Miss Anna. Anna is missing. The expected anger didn't come. Lu Sheng couldn't help but look up, but he found that Li Onping's expression didn't change. He just looked at him with a calm face. Then, a series of orders came out from Li Onping's mouth. "Within half an hour, I want to see the information of all the relevant personnel. Within 6 hours, all the higher-ups of the Federation and above, as well as all the ability user aristocratic families. Their information must appear before me." Lu Feng moaned as if the sky had collapsed. "Sir," Li Onping just smiled coldly. "Don't worry. The ones who should be afraid now are them." Chapter 298. The voice that Tony Abel heard was the voice created by Li Onping's Qi incarnation, which vibrated the air beside his ear. Hearing the voice that sounded like someone was talking beside his ear, Tony Abel was shocked. He looked around, but didn't find anyone. However, his family's years of training allowed him to quickly calm down. Tony Abel said in a very calm tone, "Friend, are you an ability user? If you want money, there's cash in the drawer of the shoe cabinet." Li Onping coldly snorted and said indifferently, "Do you think that since I called out your name, I'm only here for money?" A demonic voice sounded in Tony Abel's ear. "Tony Abel, level 1 ability user. As the eldest son of the Abel family, your existence has been completely overshadowed by your sister's brilliance." Tony Abel said in a low voice, "Who are you?" Li Onping said in a sinister tone, "Hee, for so many years, you've been suppressed by a woman. Until now, you're still a pitiful level 1 ability user. Your sister is 3 years younger than you, but she's already reached level 4 with the halo of a genius and has begun to take over the family's affairs. Do you really not feel jealous at all?" "She's my sister." Tony Abel closed his eyes and remained unmoved. "Humph." Li Onping changed his tone. "Don't you want to become stronger, to make your sister worship you again? To make your father regret his indifference to you? Right now, there's a bright path in front of you." "Hee, are you trying to say that you can help me do that?" Tony Abel laughed. "Then I still want to become a level 5 ability user and become the president of the Federation." He didn't expect that after hearing his completely joking words, the other party would actually agree and directly said, "Humph, a mere president of the Federation is nothing. With my help, you can definitely become the king of the Western continent." Tony smiled and shook his head, completely ignoring the other party's words, and said casually, "Brother, it's so early, don't joke with me." Li Onping sighed. "It seems that you still don't understand your current situation. All right, I'll let you understand." Tony's eyes were suddenly filled with fear. He felt as if his body was bound by an invisible force, and he couldn't move at all. This was the effect of the nihility force field. Next, Li Onping slowly increased the power of the nihility force field wrapped around Tony's arm. Feeling the sharp pain coming from his arm, a scream came out of Tony's mouth. But just as the scream came out, it was scared back. A huge black palm stretched out from his mouth and grabbed his head. Tony Abel looked at all of this in fear, but he didn't have any strength to resist. Li Onping's voice rang in his ears again. "Do you understand now? If I want to kill you, it would only take a single thought. Similarly, it would be very easy for me to put you in a life or death situation and torture you." Because he couldn't move his body, he could only see Tony's eyeballs moving up and down. Li Onping patted his head and put his arm back from his mouth. Tony felt his body relax, and the force binding him disappeared. Then, his body went limp and he fell to the ground. The terrifying scene just now disappeared like a nightmare, but Li Onping's voice reminded him that it was far from over. "Remember, I'm in your body. I can see all of your little movements clearly. So, from today onwards, you'll do whatever I say. Tony said with an unsightly expression. How long are you going to stay in my body? Don't worry, as long as you do as I say, I'll leave soon. Not only that, but during the time you help me, you'll get endless benefits. Whether it's power or wealth, they'll all come rolling in. Li Onping didn't forget to give him some benefits. If you're obedient, I'll even help you become the king of the entire Western continent. However, Tony didn't believe his words. He only thought that Feng Xingjian was threatening him to do something. However, he couldn't understand why Feng Xingjian would choose him if he had such a strange ability. Of course, he didn't know that Li Onping had chosen him after many considerations. Firstly, he was a student of the Central University, so it would be convenient for Li Onping to investigate Anna's matter. Secondly, he was a descendant of an aristocratic family, so it would be easy for him to control many resources. However, he was also a descendant of an aristocratic family who wasn't valued, so there weren't many people paying attention to him at all times. It would be convenient for him to possess his psychic incarnation from the start. Secondly, he was also an ability user, so it would be difficult for others to notice that his psychic incarnation was possessing him. Just then, Tony's cell phone suddenly rang. Just as he was hesitating when he saw the caller ID, Li Onping said coldly, "Answer it." Seeing that Tony was still delaying, Feng Xingjian's field of nothingness wrapped around his arm once again. Feeling a tearing pain coming from his arm, Tony shouted, "I'll answer it. I'll answer it." He quickly pressed the answer button with his other hand, and a woman's voice could be heard from the other side of the phone. It was the voice of a crying girl. "Tony, where are you?" Hearing this girl's voice, Tony couldn't care less about Li Onping. He asked anxiously, "What's wrong, Carolyn? Where are you? Did someone bully you?" "I'm at Ryan's house. Come over quickly." With that, she hung up the phone. Hearing the girl's request for help, Tony pressed the dial button as he walked out. "You gonna look for Ryan?" At this moment, Li Onping's words made him fall to the bottom. Only then did he remember that there was still an unknown life form in his body. However, thinking of the girl he loved, Tony braced himself and said, "Carolyn is in trouble. I'm going to help her." "Are you sure she's in trouble?" Li Onping said disdainfully. "I heard a few men trying to suppress their laughter over the phone." Tony stopped. "You're saying that they're playing with me?" He looked at the phone screen. The call had been hung up. The girl named Carolyn had beautiful blonde hair. She was a famous goddess in the school and was also Tony's crush. However, she had recently been pursued by a tall, rich, and handsome man named Ryan. It was said that they were in love. Ryan was also from an aristocratic family. However, he was different from Tony, who was ignored. Ryan came to the Central University to study. Thinking of this, Tony hesitated again. Li Onping laughed softly. "You like that girl named Carolyn? What do you want?" Tony said uneasily. Then he shook his head, turned around, and said, "Forget it, I'm not going." However, Li Onping stopped him. Under the cover of the Nihility force field, Tony was like a puppet, walking step by step toward the door. "Go to Ryan's house. If you don't want her body to be torn apart by me, then walk there yourself." Feeling the power binding his body gradually disappear, Tony only felt a piercing pain throughout his body. Thinking of what Li Onping had said, he did not dare to hesitate in the slightest. He only asked in puzzlement, "What are you trying to do?" "Don't worry, it's something beneficial to you. I do want you to do something for me, but with your current situation, you can't help me for the time being." Li Onping said slowly, "So, I'll help you a little first. It can be considered as laying some foundation for future matters." Li Onping's words made Tony feel more and more uneasy. He shouted softly, "Ryan is a genius of the Lannister family. He just reached the 3rd energy rank this year. Don't provoke him." Hee hee. Li Onping laughed. "Don't worry. Don't you like that Carolyn? Then you just need to prepare to F***CK her properly." "What did you say?" Hearing this, Tony stopped in his tracks. However, he couldn't help but scream. He felt as if a sharp knife was scraping against his bones. Li Onping's voice was like the cold wind of Siberia, blowing past his ears. "I'll say it one last time. If you stop what I want you to do for no reason, then it won't be as simple as just a little pain. I have thousands of methods in my mind that can make people wish they were dead, but there won't be any repercussions. I believe that you won't want to try them all. The pain from his arm and Li Onping's words made Tony shiver uncontrollably. Chapter 299. Tony and Ryan were both wealthy students of the Central University and lived not far from each other. 15 minutes later, he had already arrived at each other's house under Li Onping's urging. He saw a 3-story villa, and loud music filled Tony's ears before he even got close. Li Onping asked, "They're having a party early in the morning?" Tony laughed bitterly and said, "They've been having it since last night." When he walked into the villa's living room, he saw a blonde girl sitting on a muscular man's lap. When Tony saw them, the two of them had just finished a long, wet kiss. Seeing this, Tony's eyes dimmed, and he immediately turned to leave. Who knew that the moment he turned, Li Onping would use the nihility force field to restrain him. He said hatefully, "What are you doing?" "They're playing with me. I have to leave before they discover me." "Trash." Li Onping snorted coldly. "Do as I say." On the other side, Leon had already seen Tony when he entered the living room. The wet kiss, just now, was a demonstration to Tony. Now that he saw Tony turn around, he did not know what he was doing. A sinister smile flashed across his face, and he patted Carolyn's butt. The latter stood up obediently. Leon laughed loudly as he walked towards Tony. "Hey, isn't this the coward from the Abel family? Are you here to ask your mother for milk? Minors are not allowed to enter this place." The men and women at the side were all Leon's friends and classmates. When they heard Leon's words, they all jeered and hissed at Tony. Li Onping also laughed. "Seems like you're doing worse than I thought in this school. To think that you're an ability user." Tony said anxiously, "What are you doing? Let go of me." "Leon is a level 3 ability user. Don't provoke him." "Oomph. I'll teach you a lesson later. Right now, you just have to keep an expressionless face." Before Tony could figure out what Li Onping meant, Ryan had already slapped Tony's shoulder and said unhappily, "Bookworm, I'm talking to you. Didn't you hear?" Then he pulled hard, trying to make the other party turn around, but he found that the other party was like a mountain, not moving at all. Just as he was wondering, Tony turned around himself, but his movements looked like that of a stiff puppet. Ryan showed a disdainful expression. "Fool, what the hell are you doing?" Extending his hand, he pinched Tony's mouth and said, "I'm telling you now, don't you dare have any ideas about my girl. Otherwise, if I see you within 500 meters of Carolyn next time, I'll stuff your head into your own ass. All right? Do you understand?" But what made him feel strange was that Tony's face looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time. It was as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't say anything. However, the people around him only thought that he was afraid and laughed at him. The blonde girl called Carolyn even cheered and sent a flying kiss to Ryan. But the cheers turned into screams in the next moment. Ryan only wanted to give Tony a few more slaps and let him go. But in the next moment, he felt a pain between his eyebrows and completely lost consciousness. In the eyes of the bystanders, it was as if Tony had punched Ryan's head, and the latter's head exploded like a blood-red firework. White and red liquid scattered in the air, splattering all over the people around him. When the headless corpse fell to the ground with a bang, everyone went crazy. Tony stared blankly at the headless corpse on the ground. The opponent, who had reached level 3 energy rank and was considered a powerful genius, was completely destroyed by him at this moment. Ability users were actually such fragile creatures. Most of the students in the surroundings were just ordinary people. When Clan's head was smashed apart by Tony's fist, all of them screamed and rushed out. Carolyn was no exception. The goddess in Tony's heart was now covered in blood. She screamed as she retreated out of the classroom. Carolyn? She looks just like a noisy hen. Tony suddenly had such a thought. At this moment, Li Onping's voice brought Tony back to reality. "Remember, this time I will help you settle this matter, but next time you will have to do it yourself. And as a punishment for not listening to my orders." A heart-wrenching scream came out of Tony's mouth. He saw his right little finger being twisted by an invisible force, as if it had turned into a fried dough twist. The excruciating pain caused him to kneel on the ground and gasp for air. Li Onping said indifferently, "Next time, it won't be as simple as a finger." Tony trembled and said, "You devil. How could you kill him? The Lannister family won't let us off. You went against the agreement between the bloodline families. I was killed because of you." "Agreement? Family?" Li Onping laughed coldly. "You are the eldest son of the Abel family. Do you really think that this kind of thing can really bind me? The strong die, and the stronger live. This is the principle of this world. Have you ever seen a rank 5 ability user from the virtual number service being controlled by some bullshit agreement? The only reason they dare to interfere with you now is because you haven't displayed enough strength yet. If you want to change the principles of this world, you can only become stronger than all the people who set the principles combined." After saying these words, a few people who looked like bodyguards rushed in from outside the door. When they saw Ryan's body on the ground, their faces changed greatly. Li Onping shouted, "Kill them." Tony refused and said, "Killing them will only make things worse." He was still hoping that the other party would capture him and then let the family's experts catch the unknown creature in his body to prove his innocence. However, at the next moment, those bodyguards did not even say a word. They immediately pulled out their pistols and fired at Tony. A series of clinking sounds rang out as the bullets hit the field of nothingness. Tony was naturally unharmed. Li Onping laughed coldly and said, "The master they were protecting is dead, and you are the eldest son of the Abel family. No matter how much your father doesn't think highly of you, he can't let you die outside. That's a matter of your family's reputation. Therefore, once they capture you, your life won't be in danger. However, they will have to pay with their lives for their negligence. Therefore, it's natural for them to act like they don't know anything and get rid of you. This way, even if the Abel family blames them, Ryan's father might be able to save their lives." Hearing Li Onping's analysis, Tony fell into a daze. On the other side, when the bodyguards realized that the bullets were ineffective, they all pulled out their weapons and unleashed their abilities to attack. Every one of them was agile and had level 2 abilities that complemented each other. If it were any other time, Tony might not even be able to hold on for a second before being torn into pieces. However, at this moment, Li Onping's psychic energy incarnation was in his body, and the situation was completely reversed. Seeing that Tony still did not make a move, Li Onping snorted coldly. 7 black arms stretched out from Tony's back like 7 lightning bolts. These arms formed from psychic energy were not only fast, but also ruthless. Those bodyguards could not even react before their heads were grabbed by the black palms. In the next second, 7 crisp sounds rang out at the same time. 7 headless corpses fell to the ground at the same time. The entire room seemed to have been covered with a layer of blood-red carpet. The pungent smell of blood made Tony want to vomit uncontrollably. "Don't panic." Li Onping's voice sounded like the devil's voice to Tony. "You're going to vomit later. Right now, it's just a little dessert." After saying this, Tony let out another blood-curdling scream. He felt an intense pain coming from his abdomen. It was as if there was something in his abdomen that was crushing his intestines. He opened his mouth and spat out a large mouthful of blood. He asked weakly, "What did you do?" Li Onping said calmly, "Nothing much. I asked you to make a move earlier, but you didn't. I can only fulfill my promise." He smiled. "Don't worry. I only placed your appendix into your stomach. It doesn't taste bad, right?" Hearing Li Onping's words, Tony felt a wave of nausea in his chest. In the next moment, he started to vomit toward the floor. Bits of flesh and blood fell out from his mouth, making him feel increasingly disgusted. His fear toward Li Onping continued to increase. After 1 to 2 minutes, when Tony finally felt a little better, the sound of police cars came from outside the house. As this was the upper city and the territory of the rich, the security here was naturally very good. Since Tony had killed Ryan in front of so many people, someone would naturally call the police. Your police aren't slow. Just as Tony was suspecting that Li Onping was up to no good again, the other party said, Now, if you don't wish to taste the feces in your large intestine again, go and knock all of those police officers out. Remember, there's no need to kill them. Tony groaned. What on earth do you want? Nothing. Li Onping said casually, I just want to help you fight for some rights among the strong, so that it'll be easier for me to do what I'm going to do next. Chapter 300. 7 to 8 police cars smashed through the metal gate and rushed into the lawn in front of the villa. A group of fully armed police officers rushed down and pointed their guns at Tony, who had just come out of the door. Put down your weapons. Put your hands on your head and walk out. Tony raised his hands up innocently and walked out slowly. 2 police officers immediately rushed up and wanted to handcuff him. However, just as they got close, Tony knocked them out with his lightning-fast fists. What are you doing? Tony exclaimed. Li Onping laughed and said, knock them out or eat sh*t. Choose one. They have guns. Before Tony could finish his words, the other police officers saw him make a move and open fire without saying a word. Countless bullets hit Tony's body, but they had no effect. He fell to the ground weakly and made a series of clanking sounds. Li Onping said calmly, what's the use of guns? Didn't those bodyguards shoot at you earlier? Now, these police officers are also shooting. What's the use? Li Onping's tone had a unique charm. As long as I'm by your side, even if you're in the center of a nuclear explosion, I can guarantee your safety. Right now, you're invulnerable and invulnerable. You also have endless strength. Do you understand? The reason why he did not mention speed was because although the Nihility force field could provide Tony with great strength, Li Onping did not plan on letting him endure too much speed. That could easily cause his body to collapse. After all, if he were to use pure strength, the Nihility force field could withstand it. However, if he were to increase his speed, all sorts of pressure would directly affect Tony's body. Moreover, this would make it easier for Li Onping to control. After all, he was using the Nihility force field to envelop Tony. Tony was in direct contact with the outside world through his force field. The amount of strength he used in each attack was within his thoughts. Tony looked at his palm in surprise, and then looked at the surrounding police officers. Even after the police officers had used up all their bullets, they could not do anything to Tony. Now, chase all of them away. Thinking of Li Onping's punishment, Tony no longer hesitated and strode towards the policeman. With a punch, a white policeman who had rushed up was punched in the stomach by Tony. He flew straight for more than 20 meters before falling to the ground. Tony looked at his fist in shock. At this moment, a few more policemen rushed up to subdue him, but whether it was capturing, punching, or kicking, Tony was like a mountain in front of them. None of their attacks had any effect. Even when a punch landed on Tony's head, Tony didn't feel it at all. He didn't even sway. Experiencing this novel feeling, Tony grabbed a police officer and tossed him lightly, throwing him through the window on the 2nd floor. Then he grabbed the other policeman's fist and squeezed it slightly. The policeman was already holding his hand and screaming as he fell to the ground. Bullets were fired again, but other than the tinkling sound of the shells hitting the ground, there was no effect on Tony at all. Instead, he slowly walked toward the bullets and then kicked the police car. With a boom, the police car didn't crash into the policeman as Tony had expected. Instead, it was kicked up into the sky, flying several hundred meters and landing in a square 1 kilometer away. When the other policemen saw this scene, they didn't dare to continue fighting with Tony. All of them were so scared that they ran away. Tony didn't care about them. He looked at his hands in disbelief and mumbled, "This is my current power? Is this the taste of being strong?" He couldn't help but think, those weak and useless ordinary people are my kind? Are they also considered my kind? Just then, Li Onping's voice was like a basin of cold water, extinguishing the flames in his heart. "All right, let's go. Let's leave this place first." Tony nodded. This time around, he didn't go against Li Onping's orders. The power he had used earlier was like a forbidden fruit that gradually sprouted in his heart, displaying an irresistible temptation. After leaving Ryan's house for several hundred meters, Tony asked, "What should we do next?" Li Onping said calmly. Take out your cell phone and give your father a call. My father? Tony frowned and said, sounding a little unwilling. However, Li Onping didn't care and said directly, I don't wish to repeat myself. Tony was helpless and could only take out his cell phone unwillingly. He dialed a number that he had not called ever since he entered university. After 3 rings, a mature man's voice rang out. Hello, Tony? I'm very busy now. You have 3 minutes. Sensing the other party's arrogant tone, Tony almost hung up the call. However, considering his relationship with Li Onping, he didn't dare to do so. Next, Li Onping used a voice that only Tony could hear, vibrating the air in Tony's ear as he spoke to him. I'll say what I want to say next, and you'll repeat after me. Tony nodded. A few seconds later, he said to his father on the other end of the phone, I killed Ryan from the Lannister family. Hearing Tony's words, the other party seemed to be stunned for a moment. A few seconds later, he continued, Continue. His tone didn't seem to be as impatient as before. After I killed him, I also killed the bodyguards beside him. Then I fought off the police who rushed over. Are the police dead? Where are you now? I'm not dead. I'm at the Villa dormitory area of Central University. Understand. I'll arrange the rest, the other party said seriously. From now on, keep your phone connected. I'll call you again at any time. If the police find you, don't resist. Go with them. If it's someone from the Lannister family, don't let them catch you. Understand. After Tony said this, the other party had already hung up the phone. A strange expression appeared on his face, and he said with an uncertain tone, He is concerned about me? Of course. If you really killed a level 3 ability user and 7 level 2 ability users all by yourself, and then fought off the police who rushed over, of course he'd pay attention to you. Hearing Li Onping's words, a hint of confusion flashed through Tony's heart. He worked hard in his studies, had excellent grades, received scholarships, and got into the best university in the entire Federation with his own efforts. His father didn't even smile at him. But now, he had killed someone, attacked the police, and was a fugitive. Yet, his father was starting to pay attention to him. What's wrong with this world? Li Onping sneered. So what if you're good at studying? With the able family's power, how many graduate students and doctoral students do you think your father can recruit if he wants? These things are meaningless to him, because what he wants isn't a subordinate who can help him earn money. What he needs is a strong person who has invincible power, who can suppress the whole family and lead the whole family forward. Not someone who can be replaced with money and can be grabbed by the whole country. Tony lowered his head and didn't say anything. Everything he experienced this morning was like a dream, causing his heart to be in a mess. After walking for a while like this, Tony suddenly sighed. What's going to happen next? Li Onping said in a habitual tone, that will depend on the result of the struggle between your family and the Lannister family. But according to your performance this time, your father has confirmed that he'll definitely do his best to protect you in the future. In the future, your right to speak in the family will also be increased. It'll also be convenient for me to carry out some activities. Is that so? But it's still too slow. After Li Onping said this, he suddenly controlled Tony's arm and pointed at a bus stop in front of them, saying, Who's that? As it turned out, as the villa area of the Central University, all the people who live here were rich people, and the place was very big. However, these rich people all had cars, so the place was naturally not much. However, the servants, cleaners, and security guards who worked for them couldn't possibly have so many cars. Therefore, a few bus lines have been opened up in the villa area for the people who worked here to get to and from work. At this moment, Li Onping was pointing at such a bus stop. However, there was no one at the bus stop. Tony was puzzled. There's no one there? Li Onping pointed again and said, I'm talking about that screen. Only then did Tony realize that the other party was referring to the electronic screen at the bus stop. It was a television that the bus company had specially set up beside the bus stop, and it would randomly broadcast some television programs. At this moment, the television was broadcasting some entertainment news. Tony walked in and said, Oh, it's William Johnson, the playboy, he added. Li Onping asked according to the information in his memory. Why is he here? Johnson represents the four elementalists, right? Shouldn't their foundation be in Stone City? You're right, but he seems to have come here recently to invest in industries. It's said that he's investing 5 billion yuan to build a science and technology park with the government. Looking at the scene on the news, Tony said, but he's also a regular on the entertainment news. I heard that he's played with more than half of all the female celebrities in the Federation. At this moment, the phone in Tony's hand rang again. He looked at the caller ID and saw that it was his father. Chapter 301. In a five-star hotel suite, Tony was lying on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling above his head. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and Tony's cell phone rang at the same time. Open the door. He picked up the phone and only heard 2 words before the other party hung up. Li Onping said casually, "It's okay. Go open the door. It should be the people sent by your father." Tony opened the door of the hotel room and saw a group of people filing in. They completely ignored Tony's existence and began to decorate the entire room. They placed desks, computers, various equipment, and checked the room. However, they didn't even look at Tony, who was standing at the door. It wasn't until the last tall and thin man wearing glasses came in that he nodded at Tony and said, "Hello, young Master Tony. My name is Viper. We will take over your matter now. We already know the details. In order to protect your safety, please follow our instructions for the next period of time." After saying that, he ignored Tony's answer and walked into the room to arrange work for the others. Tony came to the hotel to wait for them after receiving the call. Among the people who came, there were a total of 12 people, 6 of whom were ability users. Except for the tall and thin man who was a level 4 ability user, the rest were level 3 ability users. It was clear that this was an elite force of the Able family. They were originally carrying out a key mission, but because of Tony, they were transferred over. This made all their efforts in the mission go to waste. In their opinion, this was purely their useless young master who caused trouble and needed them to clean up his mess. Naturally, no one gave Tony a good look. Li Onping didn't care about the other party's attitude at all. He said to Tony, "Tell them that you want to borrow their intelligence network." After 3 punishments, although Tony didn't listen to everything Li Onping said, he would at least carry out more than 80% of the orders without hesitation. However, when Viper heard Tony's request, a trace of impatience flashed in his eyes. However, although the other party was a rookie, he was still the young master of the Able family, so he did not completely refuse. Instead, he evaded and said, "Young master, the Lannister family has probably sent out a hunting team. Our forces in Canvas are not strong, and the intelligence network is fully operational to monitor the movements in this area." Although Viper didn't reject the offer outright, everyone understood what he was implying. But Tony paused and seemed to be distracted. Just as Viper was starting to get suspicious, Tony said to him, "If you want me to cooperate with you, then give me the information about last night's dance party at the Central University's finance department. Otherwise, I'll turn around and leave." According to the information from the special forces that were protecting Anna, Anna went missing after the ball ended. The location of the kidnapping should be at the ball. At that time, they were attacked by something similar to hypnosis, and all of them were unconscious. Viper narrowed his eyes and looked at Tony. Although Tony's gaze was somewhat evasive, he still insisted on glaring at him. He sighed and said, "Young master, you don't understand. You're taking your life as a joke." Tony continued to pass on Li Onping's words. "You're the one who doesn't understand." A few seconds later, Viper had no other choice. He couldn't just tie Tony up forcefully. Of course, the key point was that Tony's request wasn't difficult for him. He asked, "What information do you want?" "A list of all the people involved in the ball and information, including all the waiters, chefs, security guards, and other staff. Also, surveillance footage. I want all the surveillance footage that disappeared on the day of the ball. Also, the sponsors, organizers, designers, and organizers of the ball. I want all the blueprints for the ball." Although it was a little cumbersome, it was just a university ball after all. If Li Onping were to investigate one by one, he didn't have any subordinates in the Federation, so it would take a lot of time. But for the Able family, the local tyrant of the Federation, it was just a matter of a few words. Viper nodded. The others glanced at Tony and went on with their own business. 2 hours later, Viper handed a USB drive to Tony. "The things you want." Tony nodded and said after a pause, "I also want a computer. Thomas, give him a laptop." The big man named Thomas walked in front of Tony with an expressionless face and handed him a laptop. The next moment, Tony opened the laptop and began to look at the information in the USB drive. Viper didn't care at first, but 10 minutes later, he looked at Tony with a strange gaze. The screen of the laptop was scrolling down quickly. A list of people, information, and photos flashed quickly. Even with Viper's eyes, he couldn't see the content of the information clearly. He shook his head and saw that Tony had closed the document and opened the video file to watch the surveillance footage. Watching surveillance footage was a very boring thing, especially this kind of 24-hour video. Even if you sped it up 8 times, it would still take 3 hours to finish watching. Not to mention, there were 12 such scenes. But Tony's view was different. He was pressing the keyboard and fast-forwarding the video. In Viper's eyes, the progress bar at the bottom of the video was like a fuse, moving forward at an incredible speed. Not to mention the scene, Viper could only see large chunks of meaningless footage. The 24-hour-long video was played in just 10 minutes. Viper shook his head and walked away when he saw this. In his heart, Tony was just wasting his time pointlessly. He couldn't find any clues that he wanted at all. But he didn't know that the person analyzing the information wasn't Tony in front of him, but a demon hiding in his body. In fact, with Li Onping's ability, even if the video and documents were skipped 100 times faster, he could still finish watching them without missing a word. The only problem was that the laptop in front of him didn't have this kind of performance. More than 2 hours later, Tony closed the last video file. He asked softly, "How was it?" "Shut up. Don't affect me." Tony immediately shut his mouth and said nothing. He had been watching meaningless scenes for more than 2 hours, and he felt extremely depressed. At this moment, he seized the opportunity to stand up. But when he turned his head and looked around, he didn't know when, but the entire room was already shrouded in smoke. Everyone, including Viper and his subordinates, looked busy. Most of them were on the phone, while the rest were on guard. It seemed that Tony had caused a lot of trouble this time. At this moment, on the other side of the planet, Li Onping, who was in Xia's palace, was working his brain at high speed. All the information related to the ball was input into his brain, and, as if it was reproduced in reality, a model of the ball that day was generated in his mind. Everyone's position, everyone's name, origin, and the structure of the entire building gradually reappeared in his mind. Li Onping felt as if he had attended the ball again. Through his amazing computing power and sufficient data, he perfectly reproduced the scene. He followed Anna into the ballroom. He watched as the other party got along well with the local students after being introduced by a few girls. The entire ball was covered by a total of 4 cameras. Li Onping could clearly calculate everyone's movements at the time. A total of 162 people saw Anna. 1 person saw it more than 10 times. 4 people saw it more than 9 times. A total of 15 men hit on her. 7 people looked at her for more than 10 seconds. Li Onping did not think that Anna's disappearance was the work of the Federation government, because it was meaningless. Anna alone had no other effect other than increasing the hatred between Li Onping and the Federation. Li Onping would not compromise with the Federation because of Anna. Besides, very few people knew about the relationship between Anna and Li Onping. In order to prevent Anna from getting involved, the higher-ups of Xia had completely wiped out all information related to the two of them. Therefore, Li Onping believed that Anna was kidnapped mostly because of herself. Therefore, on the day of the ball, the names of all the people who showed interest in Anna were sorted out, followed by their information. Like a waterfall of data, it instantly filled Li Onping's mind. All the powerless and ordinary students were eliminated at the first moment. The suspects were screened out one by one, then eliminated by other information. Li Onping's brain was like a supercomputer, continuously screening out possible suspects. In the next moment, all the figures disappeared, and the image of a white man appeared in Li Onping's mind. Robert Snow. When Li Onping softly said this name in the palace, Tony, who was far away on the other side of the planet, stood up. A hint of helplessness flashed through his eyes. In the next moment, a black arm reached out from behind him. Viper and the others did not even have time to react before they were knocked unconscious. Li Onping's voice was like an iceberg, slowly ringing in Tony's ears. Leave the hotel. Tony was helpless and could only do as he was told. To be able to knock out a level 4 ability user and 5 level 3 ability users in an instant. In Tony's mind, Li Onping was already infinitely close to a level 5 ability user. 2 minutes later, Tony walked out of the hotel. Meanwhile, in the hotel lobby, a man with a gloomy expression put down the newspaper and said to his caller, "He's come out. Team 1, follow him. Team 2, stand by and be ready to deal with Viper at any time. Don't let them get in the way." Chapter 302. After Tony left the hotel, he came to a secluded alley with no one around. "What on earth do you want?" Li Onping did not answer. Instead, he said coldly, "From now on, you'll do whatever I want you to do. Say whatever I want you to say. Any hesitation or unnecessary words will cause unavoidable damage to your body." Tony swallowed his saliva and did not say a word. Li Onping said in satisfaction, "Very good." The next moment, Tony's body was once again enveloped by the field of nothingness. Then, with a push force under his feet, he shot up into the sky. A few minutes later, when the members of the Lannister family's hunting team did not see Tony come out for a long time, they finally sent a few people to the alley. However, they could no longer find him. He slipped away. "Search. We must find him. Remember, capture him alive after you find him. He's more valuable alive than dead." On the other side, Tony's eyes were filled with astonishment as he flew through the air. His eyes grew brighter and brighter as he watched the ground under his feet pass by quickly. However, he kept to what Li Onping had said. He did not say or ask anything. However, deep down, he was becoming more and more respectful toward this unknown ability user in his body. Li Onping did not care what he was thinking. The speed that Tony was traveling at was extremely slow to him, who was used to flying at supersonic speeds. A few minutes later, the two of them returned to the Central University's villa district. Li Onping descended toward one of the villas according to the information in his memory. Li Onping scanned the villa with his powerful psychic energy. He had already sensed that there was only one level 2 ability user in the villa. Therefore, he controlled Tony to smash through the window on the second floor. Then, the black psychic hand extended along Tony's arm and grabbed the man before him. Robert Snow? The white man wanted to break free from the psychic hand's power. However, he realized that the psychic hand on his shoulder was as strong as a piece of alloy. No matter how hard he tried, he could not break free. Li Onping looked at Robert coldly and bellowed, "Where's Anna?" Right now, he was relying on his psychic body to vibrate the air when he spoke. Now, he intentionally increased the vibrations. With this bellow, it was as if a storm had swept through the entire room. Although Tony's mouth did not move, Robert naturally did not know that he was not the one who had spoken earlier. Moreover, his attention had long been attracted by the name of Anna. "You're here to look for Anna?" At the next moment, his gaze turned dim. "No matter who you are, you should give up. I'm afraid Anna has already been drawn into a vortex that you can't even imagine." Li Onping exerted a bit of force, and the virtual field almost deformed the other party's shoulder. Seeing Robert let out a miserable cry, he said sinisterly, "Tell me where Anna is, or die." "You won't be able to save her." Li Onping asked doubtfully, "I saw you and a few other men pointing at Anna at the ball. Were you not the one who sent people to capture her?" "It wasn't me." Robert laughed bitterly. "I was stopping them. Let me tell you the truth. Anna's matter has already involved the 4 elemental clans. You should be quite powerful, but do you think you can deal with them?" Robert's heart beat blood, and all of his bodily reactions did not show that he was lying. Liaoping also knew about the 4 elemental clans. They were an alliance formed by 4 extremely powerful ability user clans. They were a colossus located in the north of the Federation, and Stone City was their headquarters. The level 5 ability user Giant Shield of the Virtual Number Service was one of them. Their strength was enough to rank in the top 5 among the Federation's aristocratic families. When Tony heard this, his eyes were filled with shock. Compared to the 4 elemental clans, the Able family was like an ant. Robert saw Tony's expression and knew that he was retreating. He laughed bitterly and said, "So, you understand now, right? Facing the 4 elemental clans is no longer something that can be dealt with by individual courage. Once you make a move against them, regardless of whether you succeed or fail, it will mean endless trouble. When that time comes, there won't be any place for you to hide on this entire planet." Liaoping only laughed disdainfully. He could not be bothered to explain to Robert and asked directly, "Tell me who exactly captured Anna." Robert looked at the frightened Tony and shook his head. "The one who captured her is my older brother." Before Robert finished speaking, a tremor was heard in the air. "Victor Snow. Where is he now?" On the other side, Tony, who had heard their conversation, was so anxious that he was about to cry. He did not want to go against the 4 elemental clans. As a descendant of an aristocratic family since young, he had grown up hearing about the 4 elemental clans. If he were to clash with them, not only would he be dead, even his family would be finished. However, his mouth had long been sealed up by Li Onping's field of nothingness. He was unable to say a single word. Robert looked at Tony strangely. Although Tony continued to ask about Anna, the fear in his eyes was too obvious. Robert took it that Tony was putting up a strong front for the sake of his reputation. Therefore, Robert said casually, "He should still be in that villa in the outskirts of our house. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone about you. You should leave quickly. Don't bother about this matter anymore." Gratitude flashed in Tony's eyes. However, at the next second, Li Onping had already grabbed Robert Snow. Strong gales exploded, shattering all the glass and vases in the surroundings. Robert Snow heard Li Onping say coldly, "Bring me there. Bring me to your older brother." Elsewhere, Victor was receiving guests in the villa. Right now, he was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, and his face was filled with respect. The bodyguard, known as Poison Eyes, stood behind him with a cold expression. Sitting opposite Victor was an elderly man who was over 60 years old. He was half-bald, and his eyes were turbid. He did not appear to be smart or strong. However, Victor, who had the nickname of Jackal, did not dare to slight him. It was because the person standing behind him was William Johnson, one of the 4 elementalists. Right now, Victor broke out into the most sincere smile and said to the elderly man, "I wonder if young Master William is satisfied with this?" The elderly man's eyes moved slightly, and he said weakly, "It's all right." Victor immediately became happy. He rubbed his palms and said happily, "It's good that young Master William is satisfied. It's good that you're satisfied." After saying that, he clapped his hands again, and 4 girls slowly walked in from the main door. One of them was black, one was white, and the other 2 were yellow. The 4 girls were all rare beauties. What was even more special was that 2 of the yellow girls looked a little similar to Anna. Obviously, these were the goods that Victor had found with great difficulty during this period of time. He said carefully to the elderly man, "Sir, I wonder if these girls are to young Master William's liking?" However, he did not see the satisfaction that he expected. Instead, the elderly man frowned and said impatiently, "You called me here just to see this kind of thing?" Victor's expression froze. Although he did not understand what he had done wrong, he still quickly apologized. "Sir, it's my fault. I made a mistake." After saying that, he quickly waved at the 4 girls and asked them to leave. Seeing Victor's apologetic smile, the elderly man did not bother to be entangled with him. The 4 elementalists had encountered many similar small families. If it were not for the special situation this time, he would not have bothered with this man in front of him. The so-called Jackal was just an obedient pet dog in his eyes. The elderly man still maintained the reserved expression of an upper-class aristocrat. He slowly took out a piece of paper and placed it on the table in front of him. This matter ends here. You don't have to do anything else. The elderly man pointed to the piece of paper on the table and said, "If you encounter any problems in the future, call this number. We can help you solve it." At this point, the elderly man raised a finger and said with a serious face, "But remember, it's only once." Victor nodded and excitedly picked up the piece of paper on the table. His eyes emitted a fervent light, although it was not as close to the four elementalists as he had imagined. But with this favor, Victor was confident that he could expand his family's power within a year and dominate the entire underground world of Canvas. A trace of disdain flashed in the elderly man's eyes. In fact, he did have enough strength to show this trace of disdain. If it were not for young Master William's need to maintain his aristocratic demeanor, they would not have needed to leave a favor to Victor. "All right, if there's nothing else, I'll be leaving." Victor quickly stood up. "Aren't you going to stay for a while longer? Do you want to have dinner before you leave? I specially arranged for a sumptuous meal from Canvas." The elderly man couldn't be bothered to answer. He shook his head and walked towards the door. Seeing this, Victor didn't try to persuade him to stay any longer. He sent him all the way to the door before watching him disappear from his sight reluctantly. After returning to the hall, Victor took off his suit and pulled open his collar. He lay on the sofa and relaxed. "I'm really not suited to wear formal clothes." "Poison," I asked, "is there a need to do this? We've been busy for so long and almost caused a diplomatic dispute. Just for a phone number?" Victor laughed. "You don't understand. With this phone number, it's enough for us to dominate the entire underground world of Canvas." Poison, I shrugged indifferently. He and Victor were brothers who grew up together, so there were fewer scruples between them. He asked, "What about Robert? He seems to like that girl very much." Victor smiled. "Isn't it just women? Since William doesn't want those 4 women, I'll give them all to Robert. And it's time for him to be more sensible. He can't always let us take care of him. When he comes over, he'll be under you. Train him for a period of time and let him mature." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.